Company for the next few hours.
You are not going to believe the company.
This company.
You're going to bankrupt your mama's company?
At least I have the radio to keep me company.
On 93.5 and 107.5, The Fan.
So there's plenty to talk about, clearly, in the world of sports right now to end out 2023. As a matter of fact, we never even got into, nor do I think we probably will, the whole, what were the biggest sports stories? I always got a kick out of that, the year the Colts win the Super Bowl. What's the biggest sports story in Indy of the year? Well, I don't know.
I think the guy that won the 500 is the biggest sports story that year.
Purdue losing to Fairleigh Dickinson.
Wait, you think the guy, say that again, Eddie?
I was being sarcastic.
I was going to
say the driver that won the year the Colts won the Super Bowl was by far the biggest story of the year.
I mean, or any, the biggest stories are always going to be whatever the local teams do, whichever one had the biggest storyline amongst them, right? I mean, it's pretty simple. But big storylines, the Pacers obviously in Chicago to take on the Bulls. You've got the Colts getting set for the Las Vegas Raiders in a game that whoever would have guessed has AFC playoff implications, but we'll talk about that over the course of today. As a matter of fact, Matt Taylor, the voice of the Colts, is going to join us. JT the Brick, buddy of mine who used to do and still does some national radio but is very heavily involved in Raiders broadcasts, is going to join us at 2:30 today. Denari going to try to jump on, depending on the Pacers' shoot-around times, up in the Windy City. But I'm going to begin with this, and kind of flippantly, admittedly, but it's not often that I admit where I'm wrong or where I do a mea culpa, okay? But I'm going to do both right here.
You actually like mayonnaise?
Well done.
I do not. I hate it.
I thought you had a change of heart last night.
No.
Darn it.
Wouldn't that have been something? He just saw the dump on the coach of West Virginia, and he was like, you know what? I'm missing something here.
By the way, did you block Derek Schultz?
I blocked anybody who sent me the pictures of the mayo.
Well, he tweeted a video of the mayo dumping at you, but did you block him?
I saw it for 5 seconds, and then he's now blocked.
Oh, ouch.
That was the promise I made. If you send me the video, you're blocked. But give me a bowl game, Jimmy Cook, off the top of your head. I mean, a traditional bowl game.
Oh, a traditional bowl game? Sugar Bowl.
Okay. The Sugar Bowl forever was the Nokia Sugar Bowl. I'm trying to think of what it is now. Do you know what it is now?
Isn't it the All-State Sugar Bowl?
That might be right.
For a long time.
That might be right.
Is. Yep.
Is it still the All-State Sugar Bowl?
Still the All-State Sugar Bowl. It's one of the semifinal games this year.
Forever, the Orange Bowl was the FedEx Orange Bowl. What is it now? Do we know?
It is the Capital One Orange Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
The Rose Bowl. Does the Rose Bowl have sponsorship?
Rose Bowl game presented by Prudential.
Okay. But you understand my point.
Yeah.
There is no sponsor that gets – the reason that you buy sponsorship, like Husky Chocolate. Husky Chocolate sponsored Marcus Ericsson's IndyCar ride because Husky Chocolate is big in Europe and they sponsor soccer teams and other such things. But Husky Chocolate isn't even available in the it is now. But at the time that Marcus Ericsson won the Indianapolis 500 and a Husky Chocolate car, Husky Chocolate wasn't even available for purchase in the United States. So, you're losing out on I mean, you want to talk about, don't get me wrong, I'm glad they were a huge partner and I'm glad they were there for Marcus Ericsson's efforts in IndyCar. But you have to wonder if their marketing department wasn't but they had an arrangement to sponsor him for a certain number of years, whatever else. There is no sponsor that gets more bang for their buck than Duke's Mayo. I don't even know. The Duke's Mayo Bowl, what was it? What was it formerly? What bowl game is that?
I don't know. I really don't.
Was it is that the former Outback Bowl or the former Russell Athletic Bowl? Whatever it is.
I know the Outback Bowl is still a thing.
So look up what bowl game it was. It might have been the former Russell Athletic Bowl or the Chick-fil-A's the Peach Bowl. But literally the entire anybody, I mean, I'm at the gym last night and everybody's like, oh, the guy's going to have to get dumped in mayo. And I'm looking on on Twitter, and like people are talking about like the Mayo
Do
thing.
you want to give it? I have it, but you go.
Yes, it was originally commissioned as the Queen City Bowl, but it went through several name changes and has been the Duke's Mayo Bowl since 2002.
It replaced.
No, since 2019.
Sorry.
Sorry. It started as a new bowl game in 02.
Yeah.
Eddie's right about that. And then it went from Queen City to Continental to Meineke to Belk
Okay.
since 2019.
Was it
Yeah.
Russell Athletic at one point? Or is it just the Meineke Bowl?
I'm trusting
the Meineke Bowl, I do
Meineke.
remember. Okay, but my point being, I'll be honest, and I know that people will probably
Your tweet
completely
last
laugh
night
at
was
me
great,
here.
by the way.
What's that?
Your tweet last night was great. For those that didn't see it, Jake tweet. I'm going to paraphrase it, but something like, if it's 4th and goal from the 1 with like 2 seconds left and you're down a point, you're taking a knee to avoid the Duke's Mayo Bowl.
Correct.
Made me die. It was great.
I mean, honestly, like I'm thinking about and somebody's like, if you think people know what this is referencing, you're wrong. And I'm like, no, actually, people know what I'm talking about. But my point is this. College football and bowl games, and there's a reason that I'm getting into all of this about the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Number one, and I'm not a mayonnaise consumer, but mayonnaise to me, Hellman's has cornered that market. It's like Band-Aid for, adhesive strips or Kleenex
Heinz
for tissues,
ketchup,
Heinz for
sure,
ketchup.
yeah.
The average American, until 10 years ago, if you asked him name a mayonnaise, immediately says Hellman's. And now all of a sudden, and I think Duke's might have been maybe big in the South or the Southeast, but it's like people know of it now. I didn't know of it until like 3 years ago, until this horrific mayo bath started happening, which is the most disgusting thing. But it works.
It's a college football game that's taking place, right? It's a bowl game, but it feels like a sitcom that has too much over-the-top product placement in your face.
Yeah,
Like the
totally.
announcers, the sideline reporters are dipping the mayo in like a different, or dipping the French fries in mayo, a different flavor
You know what
every
it feels
quarter.
like? Here's what it feels like. It feels like when you watch the 4th of July, the hot dog eating contest with Joey Chestnut, and the broadcasters are like, it's like a mockumentary where they're acting like it is that he's on par with like the Miracle on Ice.
Sure.
It's kind of the same thing. Like they're making fun of how ridiculous the mayonnaise thing is, but it works, right?
Yep.
But here's what I was thinking about last night as I was watching that. I'm watching the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and I'm seeing the product placement, to Jimmy's point, everywhere. And then at halftime of the Duke's Mayo Bowl, they mentioned the Florida State-Georgia bowl game and the fact that 27 Seminoles have opted out. I don't blame them, to be honest with you. I get it. But 27 players for Florida State are transferring or opted out, or they're not playing, or they're getting ready for the draft, or whatever it might be. And Georgia, I think, even had some players that are like, I'm good. And basically every program but the 4 that are playing for a national championship are first and foremost dealing with who is on their roster for the postseason.
Right.
Which means that the teams so far that have been immune to that sort of departure are those whose players deemed their bowl game to be something worth playing for. So when you factor in Duke's Mayo and, as you said, Progressive or whatever it was for the Rose Bowl, Prudential for the Rose Bowl, and, FedEx, whatever it might be.
I would throw Tostitos
Tostitos
and
Fiesta
but
Bowl.
it's not that anymore. It's the Verbo Fiesta Bowl. Like, that's another one where it's like,
But Tostitos was forever,
yes.
right? But my point being, these companies are paying massive amounts of money, probably upwards of $1 million, if not more, for the title sponsorship. Who's going to be the first bowl game that says, if you are the directors of, like if we were going to do a bowl game, let's say Indianapolis is good. Here's what Indianapolis should do. When I become mayor of Indianapolis, after we throw all of the scooters into the White River, going to be easy because half of them just went out of business, and then the pedal bars also gone. They're all going into the canal of the White River, right? So we've cleaned up the streets. So once we do that, and we have the Circle City Bowl, sponsored by, who's going to be our sponsor?
Mug and Bun.
The Mug and Bun Circle City Bowl, right?
Well done.
So we're going to have Mug and Bun pay $1 million or whatever it might be. It's going to have to be a couple million. And we are going to say, listen, due to NIL and the wild, wild west that is the payment of college athletes, yes, it is true that the Circle City Bowl, the first installment of it, the Query and Company Circle City Bowl presented by Mug and Bun, which is going to be fun because everybody just drives up to the stadium, right, and parks right there. That bowl game is going to be the first that tells the players, we understand that you, those of you that are playing for Iowa State and taking on Minnesota, probably are not overly thrilled with this bowl game. So we're going to be the first one that says, if you win the game, $50,000 per player. If you lose, $25,000, so long as you're on the roster. How long is it before that happens? Now I realize you're talking, you cap it at whatever, like 60 guys per roster. I mean, you're looking, you got to have like a $10 million sponsorship. But how far are we from a bowl game saying, and I know that people are going to say, well, it's illegal or it's against NCAA. The NIL's changed everything. So you say, listen, if you get like a legitimate, like big-time, multi-million-dollar sponsor, nothing against Mug and Bun, but if you literally got like a big-time Fila or something like that, and you said, look, we're gonna sponsor this for multi-millions of dollars, and then due to NIL, we are going to sign every player on the winning roster to a one-day contract worth $50,000, and every player on the losing roster a one-day contract for $25,000. How close are we to that? And then you basically have you have what we know it to be anyway, which is official semi-professional football.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way that really takes shape is if the rumor that has been churned out for the last 2-3 years of everybody splitting from the NCAA and making their own like super conference, like that's how far you are away from that happening. And depending on where you sit on that rumor,
I don't think it's rumor as much as just like you could see. I remember, Jimmy, and it's probably been, remember the first time that there was conference expansion and realignment talk, and the Pac-12 was the one that finally like put a stop to everything. I remember because Derek Schultz, when we were doing our other show, had a great line where he said the conference carousel was spinning and then the Pac-12 threw up on itself, and so everything stopped. But you had some movement, and I'm trying to. It would have been like when Notre Dame first like became aligned in football with the ACC to some extent. And, you had some movement. Louisville went from the Big East to the ACC. This would have been like 10 years ago. And I remember at that point saying, go into give me a city off the top of your head that's not a professional city, like middle market city in the United States. Random city. Go ahead. Boom. Go. Tulsa. Perfect. So you go into Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you go into Lids. And somebody says to you, okay, Jimmy, you got to write down 10 schools that are not in the state of Oklahoma, and if you go in there and they are represented, you can buy a hat right now at Lids. You get, for each school that you correctly predict, you get $1 million. What school are you going with? Boom, go.
Repeat that for me one more time. Sorry.
You've got to walk into a Lids
schools
in Tulsa.
That are not in Oklahoma.
You got to walk into a Lids in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Before you walk in, you got to write down 10 schools.
Sure.
If they are represented as schools that you can purchase something from at a Lids hat store in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you get $1 million per school. What schools do you list?
Florida, Kentucky, USC, Florida State, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State, Duke, North Carolina.
Yeah, and Kansas is probably up there too. But from a football standpoint, there is no question that what I said back then was there are certain schools that do not need a conference alignment for their marketing. They are big enough brands that they sell. The biggest brand of all is probably Notre Dame. Secondly would be USC or UCLA. Michigan may be number one in terms of overall marketing of sales. Michigan gear sells everywhere. You go into you go to climb like Mount Denali in Alaska and somebody's wearing Michigan stuff, right?
Yeah.
So those schools, Michigan, Florida State, Alabama, the football powerhouse juggernaut schools, it seemed almost a certainty, an inevitability at one point that those schools were going to eventually combine together and say, we don't need the jurisdiction and the revenue share. Like, if I'm Michigan, why am I going to a bowl game to give 10% of it to Northwestern? Let's just form our own deal, and everybody's going to know of our 16 teams, if we completely secede from the NCAA, we'll just run our own semi-professional league. And, yeah, I mean, great. If people want to say, like, this is the year that Iowa State broke through and won the national championship in the college football playoff, that's great. But everybody knows the 16 best teams are with us. I think that was getting close before this whole realignment happened. And now what you have, seemingly, is eventually the combination of forces where the Big Ten and Pac-12 essentially are going to combine together for one Super League, and the AC, well, actually, it would be the SEC and like the Big 12, or, you know, and there was a lot of speculation there, right? Was it SEC? Was it ACC? Like, what were going to be the other two to combine forces for the other big superpower league? But the bowl season is fun. But my point being, and it's going to, these sorts of conversations from a local standpoint are going to make it harder and harder for the Indianas and the Purdues to compete. Now, you could say that it makes it easier because now there's a level playing field. If Purdue and Indiana can get the NIL money, but they're already at a huge disadvantage because of the branding of those other schools.
Well, you have to change, though, if you're talking about your scenario of players getting the money. And, yes, you're right. We were far closer to that happening. Players getting money from a bowl win than we were even 5 years ago with NIL. But a fundamental shift you would have to have happen is either up the ante for what sponsors are paying, or have a shift in the division of assets when you win that go to your conference that would instead go to the team that won. Because right now, based on the way revenue is shared, if you're an Indiana football fan and you have Michigan right now representing the Big Ten in the college football playoff, a win for them in the semifinal and a win for them in the championship brings more revenue sharing to the Big Ten. It's not that the Michigan players get paid for that. It's that the conference gets rewarded for it. So you would have to have a modification of where assets are being allocated. That's not impossible. We're closer to that conversation than we were, again, 5 years ago. But you would have to either up the ante for what's being paid by the sponsors, or you would have to modify your distribution of your winnings to the players instead of the conference.
The Pacers in Chicago taking on the Bulls. That game, 8 o'clock tonight, right, Eddie?
Yes, sir. 7:30 pregame.
So that contest, there's something about going to Chicago that always feels like a measuring stick. And I know that sounds weird. The Bulls are 14 and 18. There's nothing that overly jumps out about the Chicago Bulls to you. They're, the Pacers are probably the better team. But at the same time, coming off of what we saw with Houston, I think what you're seeing now, or what you're looking for, Jimmy, from the Pacers standpoint, is you just want to see, we know now that they can guard and make things difficult late in games for teams. They just did it against Houston. But they were kind of bailed a little bit by, once again, Tyrese Halliburton getting into that lightning in a bottle zone. So I want to see whether or not they can continue this from one game to the next, and are they re-identifying themselves? Are the Pacers suddenly a team that is in fact defensively competent? Or are they capable of doing it in small stretches, and that's that? Because they had the ability, as we saw in Houston, to put a lineup on the floor that has at the very least 4 pretty good defenders. But you can't, if you start trying to rely on that every night, Jimmy, eventually, you start wearing people down, right? And you got to have some replenishment of stock when Aaron Nesmith and Isaiah Jackson and Andrew Nembhard and Jalen Smith are on the floor, and you're like, okay, that's our defensive core here. Well, Miles Turner, obviously. But outside of that, you got to start getting other guys buying into that. But I
Yeah, it's not like when you make a change to the lineup like that, Jake, when you go more defensive-minded or defensive-focused, who you're bringing in is not suddenly, this is a two-way generational player that makes our offense just as good if you're looking at it from a coaching staff's perspective. You're sacrificing a bit offensively to play better in spurts defensively. And it worked against Houston, and it looked like it might work against Memphis a couple nights ago, but again, we mentioned the fatigue factor. You're right, Chicago is definitely a measuring stick game, but to your overall point about what this roster needs, like if you're looking at not a big franchise-changing move at the deadline in February, but if you're looking at just a piece to solidify what this team wants to be for their push to the playoffs, to find the answer to that question arrives, I think, in part, how you start 2024. That's what I've been highlighting the last couple of weeks. Because, yes, this game against Chicago matters. Chicago is like looking in a mirror that shows you your worst self. Like, that's where the Pacers could be if Tyrese wasn't playing special every night. They could be 4 or 5 games under 500, and they could be still giving up as many points as they do a game, and they would be looking for a play-in spot versus an actual playoff spot. It's not a real duplicate of what the Pacers are. You're right, they're better. But after this game against Chicago, you have that home game against New York on Saturday, and then that's where you really get potentially punched in the mouth, or you're like, no, we are a new team in terms of what we want to do defensively, with 4 of 5 matchups being unbelievable tests against Milwaukee and Boston, Atlanta sandwiched in there. That's how important this is out of the stretch, because not only do you need to identify whether or not these type of modifications can make you a better team defensively without sacrificing your offensive output, but you also need to figure out, where is this team headed into 2024, and do we need to make an acquisition at the deadline to better shore up the overall idea of not a play-in spot, a 6-seed or better appearance in the postseason come April.
By the way, there's pretty big Colts news to get to, which we will in just about 10 minutes from right now. Jimmy, in the postseason for the Pacers, which do you feel better about? Which do you think they can sustain for 4 out of 7 games against a common opponent? Having the kind of defense they closed with against Houston, or having 4 games where Tyrese Halliburton gets into that zone where he suddenly is NBA Jam pulling up from 30 feet and things are going in for him? If you go with the law of averages, the one that you go with that says it gives you a better percentage chance of getting it game in and game out is which?
It's going to be the defense if you're able to take a consistent step forward. But the one thing that we highlighted, Jake, after that game against the Grizzlies was it looked like they couldn't bring it down offensively and focus defensively because it made an overall worse product, and they were out of games faster because they whether it was fatigue, whether it was just execution, they couldn't do both. They couldn't have their cake and eat it too, score 140, and also hold teams to 117. Over the course of a 7-game series, though, what I would like more often than not are those stops defensively, because I trust Tyrese Halliburton as a player that he doesn't need 40, but he could still have a 25 and 15 night that's going to be good enough for your team to get a win as long as that defense is showing out. So I would say the defense.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? Is because it's wonderful when Halliburton gets in that zone, but when he's not in it, if you don't have anything to fall back on, you're in real trouble, right? Whereas if you can figure out how to consistently and as part of your brand play a really stout defense, then when you get that from him, then it's like, well, now, hell yeah.
You're like the Damian Lillard Trailblazers, honestly.
That's good.
Like,
that's
like
good
that's roughly where your peak is. Not that they played the same stylistically, but you had one guy that you knew could get you 40, but it might not be enough if he only has 20, right? Like, you have those lulls. And then we talked with Dave DeFore last week. The Pacers' style of play is perfect for March Madness. It's perfect for the in-season tournament. Over the course of a 7-game series, that pace is not sustainable. I think they realize that. I think they understand it. It might win you a series. It might win you a first-round matchup. It is not a sustainable style as they're currently constructed to take you to a conference final or to take you to the NBA Finals.
By the way, Eddie, do you have the breaking news sounder? Figured we would. I should have led with this. This is the biggest breaking news of the day. JMV's back. Saw him in the building when I walked in. He is on remote today. I believe he said Taylor's is where he is. So he is
Taylor's Pub in Nora.
Taylor's Pub in Nora. He is back. He's healthy. He's ready to go, and he will be doing the show today. So thank you to Brian and to Greg for filling in for the last 2 days. But You can tell when you walk in the building, it's just a little off kilter when John's not here, right? So John back in the mix. He will be with you coming up at 3 o'clock today. You guys did what last night? Eddie, will begin with you. Your evening consisted of what?
I went home, for some reason fell asleep when I was watching TV for an hour, so it was a nice little nap. Had some dinner.
What were you watching that put you to sleep?
I can't even remember. Like, I just turned the TV on to
that
something
might be why
random.
You fell asleep.
Well, yeah, I was kind of tired, so then I was just sitting there, and then I was like, boom, I'm asleep. Hour later, I wake up to the smell of chicken being made in the kitchen. I was like, okay, I didn't realize I fell asleep. Other than that, played some Rocket League with Jimmy last night, and that's about it.
Played Rocket League. Now, this is the soccer
car game.
Car thing?
Yep. Yes. Me and Eddie put some work in last night, or got worked rather.
So the two of you dial each other up on the.
It was Xbox, yeah.
Okay, and so, but I mean, you say like, let's play at such time, and then you're.
I texted him. I was like, hey, you want to play? He's like, yeah, let's play.
Had to wait for Olivia to leave for work, and then
so now
we played.
Dumb question: are you just playing against one another, or do the two of you combine as a team playing against two guys randomly in Tulsa?
That would be the ideal format, but a couple of my friends wound up joining us, so Eddie and I were sometimes put against one another. If you have like 4 people, you can just join your own little private match lobby, and then you just rotate teams. So it's me and my friend versus Eddie and another friend, vice versa.
You guys ever think to yourselves that maybe you're fortunate that you found women before this habit began?
Well, yes, every day. But additionally, this kind of thing was still, again, it's the generational thing, right? Like we would do that in college sometimes, right? Like if it was a slow Wednesday, hey, you want to play some 2K? And like my buddy and I would play 2K in the dorm or whatever.
No, I get it. I mean,
but yes, every day, Jake, every day.
Okay, so that's what you did last night. Is you played and
watch Duke's Mayo Bowl.
Yeah.
Eddie and I had Jake. In all sports, especially ones where teamwork is involved, you got to gel together sometimes. So Eddie and I, we had a rough go of it.
We're still like attempting that on this program.
We are. We lost like 4 in a row out of the gate, and then we found some chemistry late, and we worked things out.
So. And what kind of – so this is – you are cars playing soccer, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And what kind of car are you? Let me tell you the cars that I think of you guys as being, okay?
Okay.
I can't wait for you to reveal this one.
If you guys were cars, Jimmy Cook and Eddie Garrison, I don't know what car – I would like people to tell me what car they would think that I am. Like, what car am I, right? But, Jimmy, I think of you as you are actually like one of those Ford Thunderbirds, like that's new.
Okay.
And, it's sleek, but it's designed at its core to still be retro. Because you're kind of retro, right? Like you listen to Sinatra.
Yep.
You whatever. Eddie, I think of you as like a 74 Chevy Nova.
Okay.
No, actually, you're like an AMC. You're an AMC Pacer. That's what you are, Eddie.
Okay.
You're an AMC Pacer. That's the kind of car that Wayne's World rolled around in. They either had a Pacer or a Gremlin. They might have had a Gremlin, actually. One was a rounded car, and the other was like more of a slanted car.
So,
but what car do you play in this soccer game online?
Quick version. Rocket League, when they first started, didn't have the rights to car companies.
Okay.
So they would design cars and call them like different names.
Yeah, it's like Cruising USA.
Correct.
They're just like generic cars, yeah.
Now, the game's been around for a decade plus. They have sponsorships from like a Ford or BMW or whatever, and so you can unlock different cars.
Actually, Eddie, you're a PT Cruiser.
Thank you.
Okay.
The current car that I drive. Have you ever seen the movie Cars?
I'm familiar with it. I've not seen it.
Okay, so you're familiar with Lightning McQueen, though, the red car?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's me.
It kind of looks like a Miata, right?
Yes.
Like a little sports car?
Correct.
Okay.
That's me.
And Eddie, you are?
It's called an Octane. I don't know how the.
It looks like it looks like you ever seen
when
Toy
I
Story?
think of you, Octane's the first thing I think of.
You ever
Thank
seen Toy Story? Just the first one. The original Toy Story?
Never seen it, familiar with it.
Okay, you know what like the RC car looks like, where like it juts out there and has the what do you call the wing on the back? You know what I mean?
Yeah, the spoiler.
The spoiler on the back. That's Eddie's car.
Okay. Fair enough. And you guys won, you said, or lost?
We lost like 4 out of the gate, and then we ended up closing with a couple wins.
Yep.
Well, what time did these shenanigans wind down?
That's not important.
Yeah.
Did your mom come in and say, like, kids, it's time to go to bed now?
It was on the third one that we finally went to bed when Mom was like, hey, yeah, guys, keep it
2
down.
a.m.
Yes.
That's not bad.
Yep.
That's not bad.
Watch the Duke's Mayo Bowl as well. Had to do that.
Yeah.
We talked about it so much yesterday. I needed to.
Wait, somebody says I'm an 88 citation. Come on now.
Someone also said you're a 1969 Charger.
Nah. I ain't no muscle car. Come on now.
You've not reached
like
Gran
this one.
Torino levels
Jake,
yet.
you're a BMW 500 series. That's cool. I
There you
can
go.
roll with that.
There you go.
I'd like to be a 700 series, but that's cool, right? You know what that means? That means that I am still smooth despite the high mileage. That's what that means.
Yep.
Colts news. We're going to get to it. Potential big honors on the way. We'll explain next.
Hey, it's Stan Dockage here. I have been on.
So yesterday it was announced the 15 finalists for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And again, before we get into this, I'm going to lay this out for people once again, because it happens every year. Well, is he going to go in as a Bronco or a Colt? You know, that kind of thing. It is not the NFL Hall of Fame. It is the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And in the Shrine Room, I believe is what they call it, where all the busts are, and it is cool. It's funny. Have you been to the Hall of Fame, Jimmy?
If not, I want to, but I'm not.
Eddie, have you been?
I have not.
I think they may have renovated it. The last time that I was there was when Marvin Harrison and Tony Dungy were inducted, and that was, a handful of years ago. But it is obviously a very cool facility, but it's a little dated. It's kind of like being in a cross between a Holiday Inn, quite frankly, probably like the Speedway Museum, where it's got cool stuff, but it just hasn't been updated in quite some time, although that's obviously changing here. But in the Shrine Room itself, it's pretty awesome. You go in and it's dark, and there's all the busts with like just a spotlight on each bust. And it is very simple. Like for Peyton Manning, there is the bust of Peyton Manning, and underneath it just says Peyton Manning. Indianapolis Colts, 1998-2012 or 2011, whatever it was. And then Denver Broncos, 2011 to dash whatever. I can't remember what year he left. But the point being, it lists all teams of service equally. It does not. It just is very factually based. So there are 15 finalists for the Pro Football Hall of Fame for the newest class, of which 5 of the modern era will be selected. Included in the 15, Dwight Freeney, and Reggie Wayne. Here are the finalists. Eric Allen, not the former North Central and Indiana University product, by the way, but Eric Allen, who most notably was with the Philadelphia Eagles defensive back. Jared Allen.
God, loved Jared Allen.
Great player, right?
Yep.
Jared Allen, who played for Kansas City, and then, obviously, I think Minnesota is probably where he's better known.
Got dealt, was there for 5 years. He would always do like a little, if I could butcher the story, but he grew up on a farm, and he'd always like roll up a pig when he got a sack. Always made me chuckle. He'd always just get to the ground and like roll up a pig, or like he was tying an animal together.
I mean, he definitely is like a cowboy-type character, right? Yep. Willie Anderson, longtime Cincinnati Bengal offensive lineman. There are a couple of them where you're like, again, linemen are hard, right?
Yes.
I mean, can you guys tell me the lineman for the New Orleans Saints that was there for 12 seasons? 11 seasons and won a Super Bowl with them as a right guard. I mean, how many right guards are in the Hall of Fame? Either one of you guys know?
No, I have no idea.
Do you?
Jari Evans. Am I saying the first name correctly? I hope so. Then Dwight Freeney. My point being, I would be surprised if Evans is one of those. If you look at it and you're like, okay, who is the top competition for Reggie Wayne and for Dwight Freeney?
Antonio Gates.
Antonio Gates would be one. He is a finalist. Rodney Harrison, two-time Super Bowl champ. Of course, now Devin Hester. Devin Hester's an interesting one because do you typically think of just like a return specialist? But he's probably the best ever to do it. He's like the Ray Guy of return specialists, or the Adam Vinatieri of return specialists. Torrey Holt, Andre Johnson. Torrey Holt is a fascinating one because he actually has the same challenge as Reggie Wayne.
Yes, he does.
And that is that, but he also did something that Reggie Wayne did. Torrey Holt was a rookie when Isaac Bruce was like in his prime. And Torrey Holt, from the get-go, it was like, man, this guy is really good. And he led the league in receiving twice in his first 4 years in the league. He was an All-Pro in 2003, okay? Played 10 of 11 years with the Rams and had 74 touchdowns. Wonderful player, but number one, a lot of people are going to say he was a product of the system he was in because he had Kurt Warner throwing to him. He had Marshall Faulk in the backfield, and he had Isaac Bruce lined up alongside of him. But he did, when those other pieces were not there, he did continue to elevate his game, which helps him. Reggie Wayne did the same thing. Reggie Wayne had Edgerrin James and Marvin Harrison, but when those guys were gone, and now all of a sudden you've got like Donald Brown and then running back by committee. And yes, I know he went from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck, but Reggie Wayne, once Marvin Harrison was gone, elevated his game and changed from a behind-the-defense receiver to a possession receiver and extended his career. Andre Johnson, great player in Houston, came to Indianapolis, absolutely fell off a cliff, unless they were playing Houston. Julius Peppers, probably the biggest challenge for Freeney in this group.
Yep.
Fred Taylor, again, Fred Taylor to me is in the Hall of Very Good. Patrick Willis, I was actually surprised he's not already in. I thought he was. But retired early, so does that hurt him? Because it's basically a defensive equivalent, not saying at the same level of dominance, of Barry Sanders, where like you walk away, or Calvin Johnson's by a better example. You walk away in the middle. And then Darren Woodson. Darren Woodson, probably product of the teams that he's on, right? So of those players, are there any that you would say definitively, let's begin with this, between Freeney and Wayne, which one has the more clear-cut case? I think
it's probably Freeney.
I agree.
Because of, and I think ultimately Wayne will eventually get in. I think Torrey Holt will ultimately get in, but I think the fact that Wayne doesn't have that hurdle, and also he is a player when I think of those Colts teams, and I think of the other side of the ball, he's one of the first names that pops in my head.
I think Freeney gets in over Wayne first for the following reasons. We have tangible proof of what happened with Freeney when he wasn't there. Because his team went to a Super Bowl. They were absolutely the odds-on favorite to win that Super Bowl, but he got hurt and wasn't there, and they didn't win said Super Bowl. And so that adds to the mystique of Dwight Freeney because it makes you think he was so great that a fait accompli Super Bowl champion team couldn't get over the hump because he wasn't there. I'm not saying that that's reality, but there's a little bit of mystique that is added to that, number one. Number two, and I think a big part of the Hall of Fame is like thumbprint impact, footprint impact. And in Dwight Freeney's case, Dwight Freeney, unlike Reggie Wayne, unlike Torrey Holt, unlike Darren Woodson, unlike Antonio Gates, Dwight Freeney is essentially the only player on that list that has a signature play or move that is attributed to him. You know that in basketball, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was a great player, arguably the greatest player of all time, certainly at the time of his retirement. And he was the all-time leading scorer in the NBA. But even with all of the accolades, even with the national championships at UCLA, and even with the multiple championships with the Lakers and the all-time leading scorer, the cameo in Airplane, the thing about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that people remember and that stand out about him is the skyhook, because no one else did it, and it was a totally unstoppable move. And when you think about, like, you know, in the NBA, there are players that had besides Kareem, that had a signature move that was definitively theirs. Walter Payton had the stutter step. Walter Payton's the greatest running back probably of all time. But in addition to that, he had the stutter step, which is what people remember because it was different than anybody else. Earl Campbell had, you know, the lowering his head and blasting linebackers off the line. And Dwight Freeney has a move that was patently his. And I think that does separate him and makes it easier to remember him come voting time.
You look at things, a checklist, if you will, of like foolproof ways to get into the Hall of Fame at any position. Lead your specific position group in a impressive category for a year, like receiving yards or like sacks like Freeney did. Get opportunities to be a part of meaningful postseason games. People can't always control that, but like Freeney, I think, is like top 10 for sacks in the postseason. Like that's a relevant blueprint added to your resume. Make all pro teams, whether it's first or second. And I know that that's like, depending on what era you're talking about, it gets a little bit more complicated. But for modern era players, make as many of those as you can. Pro Bowl, I don't think matters as much, but it's sure nice to have that on there as well. And then to your point, having a signature move or a signature attribution like the Dwight Freeney spin move that is notable and recognizable. The other one I would throw in there is if you go talk to other people that played against him.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, I was scared of that guy.
Yeah,
that
you're
dude,
right.
like, don't get me wrong, I'm a grown man. I'm not fearful of him, but I'm worried about that matchup. That keeps me up at night.
I love,
and he has all of them.
Antonio Gates, Dwight Freeney. We'll go with Rodney Harrison, Devin Hester, and Reggie Wayne. Of those guys, the one who kept coordinators and or the person responsible for slowing them down at bay and up late the most probably are Dwight Freeney and Devin Hester.
Yeah, you got to put Hester in there for that. On that mindset. There's a reason that CBS would, or Fox or whoever, would specifically pan wide on a kickoff, not because they wanted the cool angle, because they wanted the shot of a Devin Hester touchdown return.
Right.
Because it felt like it was possible anytime you were kicking to him.
Dante Hall was up there too.
He was, yeah. I mean,
but Devin Hester did it longer and on bigger stages.
Correct.
Right.
Like, and that goes into it as well. Hall, I think of I don't know if the year is wrong on this because I think the height of Hester's powers was like 05, 06. Hall was like 02, 03, 03, 04.
Correct.
And again,
Hall was the precursor.
the stages weren't there, but yes.
But I mean,
Thanks for the love for the X Factor. I appreciate that.
when Devin Hester,
Even though he talked smack about the Chiefs.
everybody and their brother knew starting that Super Bowl, do not kick to this guy.
Correct.
Do not kick to this guy. I think Bob Lamey even, like the call probably was like, here's the kick. Devin Hester, he's going to cut to the 15 to 20, and here it goes. And then there probably was like 40 seconds of silence. I can't believe they kicked it to that guy. Everybody knew it.
I think Gates gets in.
Okay, so here we go.
Unquestionably, Gates gets in this cycle.
Of the ones that I just mentioned, okay?
And by the way, I looked online. 4 to 8 is what they say generally in a given year. There's not a limit to how many can go in, but like that's usually the number of inductees is somewhere between 4 and 8, at least from what I saw online.
It says the selection committee will meet January 16th to 17th in Atlanta to whittle down the names and choose the Hall's next class. Up to 5 modern era players can be elected.
So there is a caveat. All right. Google lied to me, but I was in the range. I'll take it.
Now, Mike Chappell is, of course, here's the way it works. When the committee gets together, the writer in the committee that covered said players is responsible for selling the case, presenting the case is probably a better way of saying it, because I don't think that it's Mike Chappell's job to convince people on what to do. But they are given the assignment of, okay, Mike Chappell, you covered Dwight Freeney, you covered Reggie Wayne. Give us the statistics and the reasons, the things that separate them and make them different. And, you know, the legendary time with, for example, Peyton Manning, where he said, it's Peyton freaking Manning. Mic drop, no other thing needs to be said. And let's face it, everyone knew, you know, I mean, come on, right? For whatever reason, be it fair or not, the wide receiver position is the position that more often than not makes for the greatest amount of case that has to be explained. And there is the receiver position, for whatever reason, is the one that I think people take the most for granted and think that great players are products of system, as opposed to other positions. People look at it and go, that's because that guy was great. Yeah. He was the system. Whereas receivers are always – the only receivers that weren't considered like benefits of their system were Randy Moss.
Jerry Rice.
Calvin Johnson. Outside of that, I mean, a lot of receivers, people are like, well, but you got to keep in mind they had so-and-so thrown to them. Or you got to keep in mind they had this running back. Or you got to keep in mind, you know, I mean, it took forever for John Stallworth to get in. Because people were like, well, he played with Lynn Swann. You know what I mean? I mean, like it just – and those two guys were legendary players. The problem for Reggie Wayne is also going to be that he is on the ballot with Torrey Holt and Andre Johnson. And I think there is the thought process that you kind of wait in line, if you will.
Yeah, but here's the issue with that, though. And this – if I was a player that all I cared about is getting in – let me rephrase that, because everybody wants to win. But post-career, when you've set everything down, if the Hall of Fame matters to you, like genuinely matters to you, I think it matters to every player that plays in a long-term capacity in the NFL. The more you hear that, well, you got to kind of sit and wait and mold things, unless you're a Jerry Rice, unless you're like a T.O., unless you're a Calvin Johnson, every year you wait, more and maybe in some cases better wide receivers
Correct. You're right.
appear on the docket. And where are you left?
What are the next, you know, then you got to look at, like for Reggie Wayne, who are receivers that would be coming out behind him that are clear-cut names over him? Like who is in queue, if you will?
That's the thing I need to.
So that, you know, that's where that question arises. By the way, Eddie, did you say yes or no on Denari?
He's officially in.
Chris Denari, about 10 minutes from now, I've got a question for you guys where I need your help in the tech area. I need your expertise when you're not playing soccer with cars, where you can help me with the tech area. Is that cool?
I think we can
All right, we'll do it next.
Bud Light Blue Friday is at Ale Emporium in Castleton.
In queue, if you will, that could be a challenge for Reggie Wayne. Steve Smith, is he eligible yet? Steve Smith Sr.,
Yes.
obviously. Larry Fitzgerald, is he eligible yet?
Coming up in a couple years.
Larry Fitzgerald's a slam dunk.
Yes.
That's really about it, right? I mean, Des Bryant, Julian Edelman, okay. I mean, those guys are nice players, don't get me wrong. Very good players. But but they're in the Hall of Very Good. Des Bryant's in the Hall of Flash and Pan, right? And Julian Edelman absolutely will be labeled as a guy that is the product of his system.
Correct, but Edelman is one of those players where because of the system, yes, but he got the opportunities, third in postseason receiving yards and receptions. He holds some other Super Bowl records, won 3 of them. Like, he's probably one that eventually gets in.
I get it, but I think a lot of people, Jimmy, are going to say there are a lot of receivers that if they had played in that franchise,
Correct.
because they're going to like 15
Correct.
Super Bowls, that would have those records.
I agree. That's why I don't think he gets in first, but I think Edelman at some point gets in because even though he is at a disadvantage in terms of that criticism, the body of work still stands out to the point that you're like, okay, yeah, he's got to get in at some point.
Okay, let me read to you guys a question that was asked to me yesterday, and it's a fabulous question. When I sent the tweet yesterday that said, hey, if I'm a coach in the Duke's Mayo Bowl and I'm down 5 with 3 seconds to go and I've got 4th and goal from the 1, I'm thinking about what happens to the winner, what the prize is, which is getting dunked in mayo, and I'm taking a knee. And I'm like, you know what? Everybody knows that we were supposed to win the game, but we didn't. So as a result of that, you, Jimmy Cook, on the other team, you get your mayo bath, and I'm going to go home, right? So I sent that tweet, and this comes in waves, okay? This happens to me in waves, and I noticed I think it happens with J&V as well because he has made reference to it. But I get the following question from a listener that texted me this, and it's a legit question, and I want you guys to help out because I think I hope the insinuation is not that I'm in a guilty party here. I have a theory on this, okay? But when I sent that tweet, I get these spam or bot replies, and they come in waves, okay? Like it doesn't happen like every day, but when it happens, it'll happen like 8 times over the course of 2 days, where I get these responses that have a hidden image, and it's from like some female, like, you know, with 9 characters, clearly like computerized robotic thing that just says like, so think I'm hot? Or, you know, like, would you? And then, you know, it's like a girl in a bikini or whatever, right? They're usually not naked, but suggestive, right?
Sure.
So this person a listener sent me this question. Jake, serious question. Why do you get more nude bots than anyone else on Twitter? They're not even attractive, just sad. And JMV has mentioned also that, like, this comes in, like, group waves where you get, like, these. Now, my personal opinion or thought on this would be that because of what, say, JMV and I do for a living, and you guys as well, but that over the course of time, the algorithms would be able to tell that the interactions that take place based off of my Twitter account, the people that are responding to it are probably predominantly 18 to 40-year-old men that are also interacting with Men's Health or Maxim or whatever else. And so, therefore, the algorithms see that that's who is seeing the responses to my tweets. Now, would that be accurate?
Not necessarily for you, but like for people that interact with your tweets. That said, and we don't have time to fully dissect this, but in the last year, Twitter has become more of a chaotic cesspool.
Oh, it's unreal.
On a number of different levels. I think you can piece together why that's happened. And here we are, where you have bots that you've never seen before replying to your stuff that have nothing to do with anything you're tweeting about.
And the other one that happened to me for a while there.
Antifreeze.
What's that? Yeah.
Antifreeze.
The one thing that happened to me a lot was about, I think it was like 3 years ago. In a tweet, I referenced Las Vegas. I don't remember what it was, or I maybe replied to like something about like a casino in Las Vegas, and all of a sudden like I had this like run of new followers, and it was all like casino bot, like poker game bot things, and it would respond to everything that I sent out. And I think it's just it's like tentacles, right? Or like barnacles. They're like barnacles that just like attach to a passing ship to see what they can
You
latch
could have
onto.
people farming keywords, and then if somebody tweets, like you mentioned, the word Las Vegas, you're going to get 6 or 7 different automated accounts. They're going to be like, oh, this guy's talking about Las Vegas. Let's follow him and send him more stuff. I don't know how Twitter's algorithm works. If you utilize TikTok, for example, which is, basically one of those like 30-second to a minute or more video platforms, if you start liking a video about Colts wide receivers, you might then get a video on greatest Colts wide
Correct.
receivers of all time.
Correct.
Which will be like greatest Super Bowl moments and so on and so forth.
And
like thinks it has something that you might like.
Or like you if you shop online, like Christmas shop online, I mean, good Lord, the ads and the pop-ups, it is unreal.
Rest in peace to the inbox.
Really good point, by the way, in regards to the Hall of Fame. Jake, when talking about the Hall of Fame, just do it this way. If there's any hesitation when asked, then the answer is no. For example, Julian Edelman, good player, but the fact that I had to stop and think about whether or not he's a Hall of Famer disqualifies
Has a
him.
Super Bowl MVP. I realized that a second ago. That's one of those where the third or fourth ballot, you look at that, you're like, oh, he has an MVP in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, so does Jake Scott.
I understand, but
so does Larry Brown.
But at a key position with key moments. Like I'm saying, it matters. I know this town doesn't like the Pats, and I agree with you that like he's probably a borderline.
He's a Hall
role
of Very
player.
Good.
He's a Hall of Very Good, but a Hall of Very Good will sometimes get you in if you know the right people. I think that one day happens with him.
We do know Chris Denari, and he's going to join us next.
The Colts today have given up 5 sacks. The Falcons flip.
Is the television voice, of course, of the Indiana Pacers on Valley Sports Indiana, Pacers Television Network, working with Quinn Buckner and, of course, Jeremiah Johnson. Pacers tonight in Chicago, taking on the Bulls for an 8 o'clock tip. Chris joins us now. And, Chris, every once in a while I do this for people because maybe I'm the only one that finds this stuff fascinating, but the travel of the NBA in general, because I do think that sometimes on road trips it's a good opportunity for teams to kind of escape the madness a little bit and bond with one another. So, that said, Houston was on Tuesday night and then now in Chicago. So, the team arrived in Chicago when? How does the travel work out in that regard, just in terms of, like, free time for players?
Sure. Thanks, Jake. Good to be with you. I'm in rainy Chicago. Just got off the bus, and I am walking the streets to find a cup of coffee, which I'll find here shortly. We got to Chicago late Tuesday night or very early Wednesday morning. I think it was about 3 or 3:30 in the morning when I got to bed because it was about a 2-hour flight after the game from Houston to Chicago. So breakfast yesterday was rather late for everybody. I think they had it booked from 11 to 1. And then the team had they did not have an official practice yesterday. They had some of the guys went over and shot, but we just got back from shoot around today. So they were out on the floor for about an hour at the United Center getting ready for tonight's game. So, so saw some guys in the hotel last night, having dinner and that type of thing. So you have free time, but, for me and for our group, I mean, I'm constantly preparing, getting ready for the next game and oftentimes trying to work ahead because between now and the All-Star break in mid-February, the Pacers one time have more than 2 days off between games and factor in a lot of back-to-backs. So it's this is the crunch time, if you will, before the All-Star break. So the next month and a half are pretty much a grind, and I think the players understand that. And so you've got to do your best to get the rest that you need when you can.
So how often, Chris, or what is and I mean, this may be decisions that you obviously aren't even a part of, but I'm curious, like when they got done in Houston, like why not just stay the night in Houston? And is that an NBA rule that if it's possible to get out that night, you do it so that there's not a chance of missing some sort of travel the next day? Why not just stay the night in Houston and then yesterday travel in the middle of the afternoon?
Yeah, I think that goes both ways. I think the different coaches and different teams have done sleep studies. We will do that on occasion this year, especially when we're west. I think there's a road trip that we end in Phoenix, and we will stay in Phoenix and then fly back the next day. But I think most people in this instance, honestly, for me, I'd much rather fly right after the game because you're up, you're awake, you've got adrenaline from the game. And I think for players and coaches and staff, you feel that way. And you feel like, hey, let's just get to the next city, and then the next day I can rest and recover. But everybody does it a little bit differently. And like I said, during the course of the year, the Pacers will do it differently. There will be, again, some nights where the team will stay after the game, and then there will be some nights where the team will fly after the game.
Chris, at what point, Chris Denari is our guest, and I hope this makes sense, what I'm about to ask, but I know that Rick Carlisle, he has certainly told Kevin and Andy on the wake-up call on this station about his desire, his awareness to start really changing things defensively and just starting to buckle down defensively. But I think that he had some hesitation or concern is a better word, as to how that could impact the Pacers offensively, because their offense was so unique there for a while and so elite, while maybe not even sustainable. But how far do you go in making changes to being a defensive philosophy team before you stop and say, okay, we are now impacting our offense too much and, in fact, coming back down to a style of play that makes us ordinary?
Well, I think that's a great question, Jake. I think the one thing that when you're going to play a high-tempo, up-tempo pace game with a lot of possessions and you're going to score a lot, you're going to give up points, right? The key is how can you manage that? And I think this team has been, 27th, 28th, 29th defensively out of 30 teams which, as Rick has said, is not acceptable. But I don't think they have to be 10, 12, or 15. I think if they can fall right around 20, I think that would be good. And he said this. He goes, "Look, I know it's a short sample size, but the last 4 games have been 4 straight games where they've allowed under 120. And when you're scoring 126, 127 points per game, you're not going to hold teams to 105 or 110. I mean, most teams, you're not going to win by big double-digit margins each and every game. So I think if you can be, around 115 to 117 with the way that you want to play, then I think that would be more than acceptable. And I think we've seen that over the course of the last 4 games. They made the change to the starting lineup the other night with Nemhard and Neesmith and Smith starting. And they're probably better defensive players, but they're also very capable offensive players too. I mean, Neesmith's one of the top 3-point shooters in the NBA right now. And so even if you look back to the Houston game, while Buddy Hield did not start and came off the bench, he was still on the floor in crunch time. So a lot of it is, who you're depending on to finish games. It doesn't necessarily mean you're one of the starters. And the one thing that I like about Rick, Jake, and is the fact that on a specific game night, he's going to go with the guys that are playing well that night. He is not beholden to, hey, if you started, you're going to finish. If you started and didn't play well, then you're probably not going to play in crunch time. So I really like how Rick manages that through the course of a game.
Pacers TV voice Chris Denari of Bally Sports taking some time with us. Chris, these teams met for the Pacers' 3rd game of the season back in October. That was a 112-105 Bulls win in that game at Gamebridge. What's the biggest difference since then between these two teams, aside from the in-season tournament run the Pacers had? Is health the biggest difference between these two clubs when you look at it going into this second matchup?
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been 2 months since these teams have played, and Chicago got off to a rocky start. They were 5-14. Zach LaVine went to the bench injured. He's missed the last 13 games, and the Bulls have gone 9-4. So that's been interesting to see. They've got some injury issues. Torrey Craig is out. Nikola Vucevic is out. LaVine is out, but they still have had some success of late. Alex Caruso's playing well. Kobe White has really stepped forward. And then DeMar DeRozan does what DeMar DeRozan does. So this is a team that does not shoot the 3 all that well, but they find other ways to win, and they've been pretty successful here of late.
Where is this matchup in terms of not fully looking ahead, but looking at what's on the horizon with the Celtics and the Bucks looming to start 2024? When you look at this contest against the Bulls and the contest at Gamebridge against the Knicks, where's the biggest area the Pacers can learn about themselves going into 2024 with these two conference contests?
Yeah, I mean, these are, the Bulls, while they're under 500, as I mentioned, they've played much better here of late. And the Knicks, led by Jalen Brunson, have played well. Yeah, you're going to learn a lot, and you hit on it. I mean, you get into 2024, you have those back-to-back games with the Bucks. You've got Atlanta in with Trae Young, and then you have the back-to-back games against Boston. So, that's why I thought the start of this little 2-game road trip was important in Houston to somehow find a win because, this team had been struggling the last 2 weeks off of the in-season tournament. They had lost 6 of 7. They had lost 4 straight on the road. And Tuesday night they were going into a building at Toyota Center where Houston was 12-2 and had been playing pretty good basketball. So I look at that as a nice win to sort of start this because you've lost some games early in the year, especially at home, that you'd like to have back. But you've probably won some games that maybe you didn't think you would win. So at some point it all evens out. But I think these are 2 games against 2 teams in the Eastern Conference that, you feel like you're on par with. I mean, we know at the top of the East right now it's, Boston, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia are probably heads and shoulders above everybody else. And then everybody else is sort of like trying to position themselves to get into the top 6 in the East.
Chris, did you find coffee yet?
No, I came in. Where am I? I walked into a department store. I'm here at the North Face to get out of the rain.
Is it?
Yeah.
Are you near Water Tower? Are you near Water Tower Place?
Yeah, we are near Water Tower Place, yes.
Yeah, Michigan Avenue is fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, we'll try not to keep you too long to prohibit you from getting your caffeine jolt here, but I'm curious of this, a little glimpse behind the curtain for people, perhaps. Every year after the Indy 500, not every, but a lot of times, Chris, after the Indy 500, as you know, you and I will walk out of the Speedway together, or we'll be up in the Pagoda together, the media center, whatever, and we'll look at the box score, and there'll be somebody that finished sixth, and you and I will say to each other, I don't remember seeing that guy the entire day. Like, I don't remember that they were in the race itself, and because they just kind of quietly went about it. So what I'm about to present for the Pacers may be in that same category, so feel free to tell me, no, Jake, that's happened for 200 laps. You just were unaware of it. I saw in the Houston game Isaiah Jackson, who I've been a huge fan of, and I just love what he brings to the table. But I saw times where he was on the floor with Miles Turner, and I thought that really ramped up not only what Turner does defensively, but just kind of added an extra blanket of security defensively around the rim that I hadn't seen before. Is that a new look, or is this basically Alex Lloyd, who just did 200 laps and I was asleep for all of it?
No, you're spot on. That's a new look. I mean, you have seen, especially on Tuesday night, you saw more big together. You saw Jalen Smith start alongside Miles Turner. You saw Jackson and Smith play together, and as you just said, you saw Jackson and Turner play. And I think, one of the things is Houston has size in their starting lineup with Şengün and Jabari Smith. But I think what Rick has been trying to figure out is rotations and what group, gives him the best starts, and how you can be more physical with size. Because as you get into the season, especially a number of these teams, that they play with a lot of size. So, yeah, I think that's something that maybe you'll see more of. And you're right. Isaiah Jackson's played very well. He had to step in a backup role when Jalen Smith was out with the injury. And he's a guy that I'm not sure, knew what his role was going to be when the season started, because you had Miles Turner, you had Jalen Smith. At an early part of the season, you had Daniel Tice. But he's only 21 years old. He's in his third year. And I agree with you. I think he can help Miles do some other things, because all of a sudden you have two shot blockers on the floor defensively, not just one.
Chris Denari is our guest, television voice of the Indiana Pacers. Pacers Bulls in action tonight, 8 o'clock tip in Chicago. Chris, the other side of that, I guess, is, with Jalen Smith, with Isaiah Jackson, with Miles Turner, and the way that those guys work, if for some reason, and this is cart before the horse, but let's just say hypothetically that a deal presents itself at the trade deadline that Kevin Pritchard is really intrigued by, and one of those three guys or somebody else is on the table, how much, or do you know, how much override say would Rick Carlisle have? If there's a combination or something that Carlisle has been able to see, you know what, this is something we can build off of moving forward, and then Kevin Pritchard has one of those guys that he wants to use for another piece, does Carlisle have the ability to go and say, no, you can't do it because here's what I have in mind? Or is that a fluid conversation?
No, I think it's fluid. I think there's a great partnership between, what the front office does on a daily basis and what Rick and his staff, does in managing the roster, on game night. I think this is everybody working together to get to the ultimate goal, and that's to try to win a championship. I mean, that's what, Rick has said from day one, and it takes steps. I mean, I think this team's probably a little ahead of schedule for where we thought it would be a couple of years ago when they won 25 games and took a big step forward last year. And maybe it would have been larger if Tyrese wouldn't have gotten hurt midway through the season. So, no, I think the whole organization is together, and I think they work together to decide on all of those kinds of situations.
Chris, how would you best describe the 2023 portion of this, not the whole calendar year, but of this season as we get closer to the new year, of this season for Benedict Mathurin? And what do you need to see from him in the second half of the calendar when we change to 2024 in the second half of the season that would make you think, no, this is the player they drafted him to be. This is a big step forward for him and ultimately is going to be very imperative for what they want to do in terms of postseason aspirations?
Yeah, I think just he's got to be more consistent. I mean, he had a six-game run a few games back where he had 2 30-point games and he was averaging 18 points and shooting the three pretty well. Last 3 games have been a struggle for him offensively, but I think it's more along the lines of he's trying to become, and they want him to become more of an all-around player, and that's not just scoring. I mean, when he came out of Arizona, that's what he was most known for. And we were talking about this the other day. It's hard to live up to that first month. He was the NBA's Eastern Conference Rookie of the Month, and got off to such a great start last year that sometimes it's hard to sustain that, especially when you're a second-year player. So I just think it's being more consistent in your role. He's coming off the bench now. I thought he did some really good things on Tuesday. Got back in double figures, hit some shots. It's being better defensively. I mean, that goes for the whole team, but I think particularly Ben. I mean, he's got a great skill set. He's got a great NBA body, and it's just being more purposeful on the defensive end. I think that's something that we'll definitely want to watch the rest of the year.
Chris, we'll let you get to your coffee. There are a few places that would be more fun to just walk around than is Water Tower Place still there, like on Michigan Avenue, like the mall?
Yeah, it's here, and I mean it's beautifully decorated. Everything, the lights here, downtown Chicago. I mean, if there is a place that you have to be, on the road during the holidays, this is probably a place that you want to be. It seemed like it was bustling. Now today, like I said, it's a little rainy out. There's still a lot of people walking up and down the streets here in downtown Chicago. But it's it's Christmas time when you're here in downtown Chicago.
And then after that, it's back here for Milwaukee, right?
No, we've got the Knicks on Saturday night.
That's right. I'm sorry, the Knicks. Then Milwaukee's on Wednesday, I think, right?
Yeah, Milwaukee on Wednesday. You got the back-to-back. So we go back to Milwaukee we'll fly on New Year's Eve. Usually, as everybody knows, the Pacers have played that 3 o'clock game on New Year's Eve, but with New Year's Eve following on Sunday, that's become an NFL Sunday, and so the Colts are home on Sunday. So the Pacers will play on Saturday, and then we'll fly to Milwaukee and play the Bucks again in that rematch, if you will, on Monday, and then the Bucks turn around and come right back to Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Wednesday.
They should just travel back together. The way they get just all on the same bus,
sure
right?
That'd go. Yeah. I'm sure that'd go really, really well.
Make sure nobody takes really Giannis's seat. That might be an issue.
Yeah, I'm going to be really interested to see how that all plays out on Monday. But I know our group is looking forward to it because this has become a rivalry, and that's good. I mean, it's a rivalry tonight in Chicago, so that's all good.
All right, Chris, we'll be watching 8 o'clock tonight, Pacers and Bulls. Enjoy it up there.
All right, thanks, guys.
Chris Denari, the television voice of the Indiana Pacers. I love, and I've made no bones about it, on this radio station, if you listen for a while, you know that, for example, Kevin Bowen loves Benedict Mathurin, right?
Build thy statue.
Build the statue, right? Although I think the statue has been put temporarily on hold. The 2 Pacer players that I love, and I'm a weird duck in the fact that, and maybe it's because I was never a great player when I played basketball. I mean, I wasn't afraid to shoot it, that's for sure. But I was definitely, as I progressed and got involved in playing with players better than I was a role type player. So I've always kind of appreciated role type players. The great Reggie Miller teams, my favorite Pacer was Derek McKee. I like Dale Davis a lot, but Derek McKee I just like because he could do any number of things that were asked of him. You didn't have to run things through him. Derek McKee, his 3-point shooting percentage went up like exponentially towards the end of sets, like in the last 5 seconds of a shot clock set, like where the ball would rotate over to him. He was just cool as a cucumber. I just liked him. This particular group, the 2 guys that I really like are Aaron Nesmith and Isaiah Jackson. Nesmith because I love any guy that at 6'6", 6'7", is not afraid because he knows that he's got to do it, to go down on the block and get physical and guard players far bigger than he is. I got a great respect for that. And he can shoot, as Chris was just talking about. So I like Nesmith's game a lot. But Isaiah Jackson I like not only because he brings a level of athleticism that is so unique to the Pacers roster, but he is becoming a better defender. I think for a while there he was just reliant upon his athleticism and wasn't necessarily studying where to be, angles, things like that. But one of the things that I really like about him is just in talking to people, that are around it, I think that by all account, he is one of the lower maintenance, and I think it's a roster that's got low maintenance guys. I don't think they have a lot of egos. I don't think they have alpha guys. But Isaiah Jackson, from his teammates to the staff to the employees of the Pacers and whatever else, is just a low-key, respectful, quiet, doesn't ask a whole lot guy. And I like that because, he is a guy that might give you 22 minutes one night, and then he gets a DMP coach's decision the next night, and then he comes back the next night and they call his number again, and he goes out and gives you 20 quality minutes. And I just think it's invaluable to have a guy that's willing to accept that kind of a role. But he is going to be, Jimmy, watch, I think that Isaiah Jackson is going to be an increasingly important figure for them, because one of two things is going to happen. Either because his value increases and he's somebody that they flip for what they think is going to be a better, fit for them, but I don't think that's going to be the case. But secondly, because like Chris was just talking about, I think we're going to see more of that where Isaiah Jackson is on the floor at the same time as either Turner or Smith and providing other side defensive help that they didn't have before. Miles Turner, more often than not, Jimmy, Miles Turner's like kind of the whipping boy for Pacer fans. I get it, like in terms of things that Miles Turner's a guy that people want to point out everything he doesn't do as opposed to everything he does do, right?
Yes.
I mean, literally, he goes out and plays solid defense and gets key rebounds late and hits a couple of big threes, and then afterwards people are mad because he didn't go 20 and 10.
Well, it also doesn't help him with his build, even though the NBA, and Miles is not Shaq. I just say that because that's the style of center in today's NBA, is the way Miles plays. There are other players in other markets around the league that do it better than he does, but you want him to be them, and he's not. He's not Embiid. He's not Jokic. He's never going to be that. And because sometimes people want him to be that and have been expecting another leap forward in his game, you undervalue what he actually brings to the table.
Right. And totally agree with that. But I just think that
and the trade rumors, right? That doesn't help either.
He is totally free. When Jackson's out there, he's a different player. And Jalen Smith, both.
Sure. Jalen
Smith's an important piece for them, too. But I do think that Jackson's assistance to Miles Turner and allowing Turner to kind of continue to do what he does, and giving him just a little bit of backup, if you will, is going to be – I think Carlisle might have discovered something here and thought, I need to go to this more. And I think you're going to start seeing more of it. Now, watch. I say that, and it'll probably never happen again. But it feels that way, right?
You get a better read on it. And I'm emphasizing this for a reason, but you'll get a better read on exactly that, Jake, at the start of 2024. What do they do when they play the Bucks and they play the Celtics? Are they experimenting right now, or is this really a new niche in what they want to do?
And I think the thing that they need to sort through is when they do that, does it in Milwaukee and Boston, for example, they were able to beat those teams in those tournament games because Halliburton was just, he was out of control. In a good way. I'm saying, he was hitting everything and not turning the ball. He was in his zone.
The other team has Giannis and Lillard, and he belonged in the same breath of those two players on those particular nights.
Correct. And I think this is a really unpopular opinion.
Okay. I like those.
When Marcus Johnson, who is the Quinn Buckner of the Bucks television broadcasts. He referred to, probably out of spite, he referred to Tyrese Halliburton as, what did he call him, a wannabe superstar?
Yes.
A superstar is a guy that goes out and has the cape on every single night. And no matter what sink you throw at them, they always have the cape on. And Halliburton absolutely, without question, is on his way to being that player. But Marcus Johnson wasn't entirely off base. Wannabe is the wrong term. But had he said, yeah, you got this guy out there that's a not yet superstar, that's probably a better way of saying it, because he has superstar tendencies.
Yeah.
But he is not doing it game in and game out. And at times, while he is a fabulous player, and there's no doubt he is the guy that he is the straw mixing the drink, and he's a great player, and he's a great personality, and he has the right demeanor. He has everything you want except for this. And it comes in time. It's just part of the evolution of him. He has yet to show that he can do those kinds of offensive things night in and night out, although it is happening more frequently than it does not, which is advantage. But also, Tyrese Halliburton still is learning how to impact the game of basketball without the ball in his hands. And that's the biggest challenge, because there have been times where if the ball is not in his hands, he is literally a liability.
When was that comment said again? Do you remember when?
It was in the game. It was the famous ball stealing game, was it not?
Yeah, it was their first meeting after the in-season tournament.
Okay, so you're telling me that last year, Wally Zerbiak calls him a wannabe all-star, and now this year he's been called a wannabe superstar. So that's it? We just need to keep having people elevate him further by calling him a wannabe, and then he's going to get there one day? Like that's the blueprint?
Jake, he meant it as an insult. He could have said aspiring. That would have been a compliment. Yeah, no, that's my point. I mean, I know he meant it as an insult, but what I'm saying is, in reality, even though it was an insult, he wasn't totally yet off base. He is going to be, eventually, within probably 2 seasons,
he's growing.
Halliburton is going to be a superstar. There's no doubt about it.
He's growing to that, right? There's a better way as a neutral, not as a Bucks fan or Pacers fan, where you can say he is a rising superstar in the league.
Additionally, he called him one of the best floppers in the association, too. So I was like,
well, that's like being the best floppers, like being the best point guard of the Lollipop Guild. I mean, that's the entire league, is it not?
Yeah.
I mean,
that is on the
the only non-flop the Pacers or any team have had this year is when Aaron Nesmith and Jalen Smith legitimately ran into each other and knocked each other out, right?
Flopper in NBA terms, especially if you're on an announcing crew, is top 5 sour grapes comment.
You're right.
Period. Like, that's just there.
You're right. And it's also, but it is like saying, he's the biggest wide receiver diva.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, right?
Yeah.
They're a dime a dozen, for crying out loud. Matt Taylor, JT the Brick, still upcoming.
I'm Darren Andrews from We Grow here.
Question for you, gentlemen. The number one overall song on the Billboard chart for the decade of the 1980s is that one that Eduardo just fired up for us.
I played that because you said you liked Aaron Neesmith because he's not afraid to get physical.
Nice. He's out there like on the exercise bike with old Olivia, right? You should like that song because it's Olivia, and that's the name of your significant other, right?
Well, see, that there's a difference. Her name's spelled with an O. Mine is spelled with an A.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So it's literally Olivia?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's unique. It's kind of cool, right?
The fun fact that she always gives whenever somebody asks her for a fun fact is that there's only one of her. So, like, if you look up your name and, like, they tell you how many Jake Queries there are in the world.
Yeah, there's one in Noblesville.
There is only one Olivia, like, with her name.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
With the last name attached.
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
with the
Yeah,
last.
yeah, that's important.
Yes.
Well, you can never get married then, because there might be an Olivia Garrison, right?
Man, wouldn't that
I'd
be
have to
something
look.
if that was like the deciding factor? Well, there's an Olivia Eddie, I can't do it.
We'll have
Sorry.
to-
But you know, a lot of celebrities get married and never change their name, right?
That's true.
Now, Olivia Newton-John, when she passed, I think it is impossible. Somebody debated me on this, and I will die on this hill, okay? From 19, I'm not saying that there were not others, but from 1977 to 1981, Olivia Newton-John was among, in my opinion, she was the most famous female entertainer in the world for that 4-year stretch. She was everywhere. Between Grease and Physical and, Xanadu. I mean, she was everywhere. But anyway, I digress. I have a question for you guys before we get to, and by the way, the Colts back on the practice field. Good news for you Colts fans. Braden Smith practicing second straight day.
I thought he was off the team.
Zach Moss.
Been so long.
I no kidding, right? Here I was thinking that he just transferred to Purdue and was playing point guard. Zach Moss back in the mix at practice, and Michael Pittman Jr. is practicing without now the red no-contact jersey, which would be an indication that he is progressing through concussion protocol and possibly would be ready for the game against the Raiders on Sunday. Now, again, I will admit, I mean, when it comes to the concussion protocol and those kinds of injuries, that is absolutely one of them that I'm like, take as long as you need, man, to be unequivocally and without question 100% before you return to the practice field.
Would you be concerned? Last week it was because they had to fly to Atlanta,
right?
And he developed, I think it was a headache or in concussion-like symptoms again. They don't have to travel this week, so would you be concerned about the possibility of something like that happening again, but only because he's not flying?
Right. I think any time, Eddie, that you're talking about concussions and the long-term impact or effects of it, concern is maybe a little bit of an extreme word, but there's always caution. Let's say that. And, I think neurologically speaking, I'm not a doctor, right? I'm not a doctor. When I was 5, my mom had a little wooden doctor thing that hung in my bedroom because she thought I was going to be a doctor. And then the first time that you go through school and report cards come out, my parents said, you should be a sportscaster.
I thought you were going to say she yanked it off the wall.
Pretty much.
We got that one wrong.
So she knew you wouldn't be good at algebra, is what you're saying.
She was absolutely aware of it. But I'll tell you part of why I'm not good at algebra. And, Eddie, it ties into your question, quite frankly. And I mentioned this the other day on the air. I do think that part of the reason I was not good at algebra is because I was on a medication between the ages of 14 and – actually, no, 12. From the age of 12 till the age of 16, I was on a medication called Dilantin, which I needed to be on because it was determined that I was epileptic. And after the fact, they kind of figured out or thought about the fact that I had juvenile epilepsy, and they thought that it might have been the result of the fact that I played football, youth football, as a kid. And the neurologist determined that I might have taken a hit to the head playing youth football that later became the reason why I developed juvenile epilepsy. Now, I have no idea the validity of that, or maybe that's long since been ruled out as a possibility because that was 30 years ago. 40 years ago. So, but my point being, the time that I was around and having to go to, albeit like, a pediatric level neurologist for 4 or 5 years, the one thing that I was able to determine and tell, even at that age, is that the brain, from the human body standpoint, medically speaking, is truly like the last frontier. It is the biggest mystery in terms of how it works. I mean, it's obviously an incredible organ, but just in terms of the treatment and the protection of it, yeah, there are probably going to be times that err on the side of caution. And I do think that when you go through depending on the severity of the concussion that he had, he could have, flashbacks, for lack of a better phrase, for years. Who knows, right? I mean, you just don't know.
I mean, we've seen a couple times this season in his career, Ryan Kelly, they've always been extra cautious with him because he has a track record of it.
Yeah, and I mean, and you look at, I was talking to a guy yesterday that played football at Tennessee State University, and he's like, and he told me, he goes, look, man, there's not a guy, and I mean, it's a different era. We're talking about a guy that was, like in the late 60s, early 70s, but he was telling me, he's like, the guys that, he's now in his early 70s, and he's like, I don't know. I take that back. He didn't play, he was in a fraternity with football players, I'm sorry. But he told me, he said, I had the guys that I ran with that played college football at Tennessee State 50 years ago, virtually every one of them has some sort of neurological damage that is very apparent today. Now, totally different. I mean, you didn't have these kinds of precautions is what I'm getting at, right? So long-winded and circuitously to your answer, Eddie, with Michael Pittman or any player, the one injury that I think if you look at it and they go, hey, he's got recurring this because coming off a concussion, I just think it is literally totally unknown, and you're going to err on the side of caution more than you are even an ankle or a pinky or an elbow. You know what I mean?
Like the NFL already has in place the setup of the independent neurologist has to clear them, and it's largely dictated by the league, right? Like, it's not one of these where, oh, it's just like a hamstring injury, just tough it out, go. Like, they have to pass that initial thing, and then kind of like what happened with the Colts, it's on you and it's on the team if symptoms pop up again to re-report and then go through it again. So that's an area where if you're a team, maybe you could manipulate it. You absolutely shouldn't, because player safety is the paramount point here. The other point, in terms of however Michael Pittman Jr. is feeling, if I'm him and I get cleared, if symptoms pop up again, why I'd want to be honest about it, not just my long-term health and my future, again, outside of football, but beyond that. It would be different for me from a player standpoint if they are a top 3 or top 4 team in the AFC. I feel like you're more guns all in, ready to go, maybe overtly cautious to some extent.
That may be
not,
the case.
Not the NFL's part. I mean the player's psychological
For sure.
aspect of it.
I think there's an element of this as well, and I'm glad that this is the case. But I think it's I definitely think, when I worked at WIBC years ago, 2007, we would get pitched all the time, as Eddie knows, when you are a producer for a radio show, you get emails all the time of like, hey, so-and-so just wrote a book about fly fishing in Montana and would be a great guest on your program, and you're like, okay. We got one in 2007 and said it was a pitch for an interview. Myself, Terry Stacy, Dan McGowan was the producer. And it was a pitch about a doctor who had done studies on concussions and the impact of it playing football. So we interviewed him. And we taped the interview because we thought, well, we'll tape it. Unfortunately, he was kind of hard to understand, not a language barrier, but he had a very thick accent. He was a fascinating guy and super friendly. And I remember he answered every question by starting it saying, yes, please, thank you. And then he would answer the question. But anyway, it turned out to be the doctor that the movie, what was the movie that Will
Concussion,
Smith was
I just
in?
looked it up. I figured that's who you're talking about, Concussion. Yep.
I forget what's his name? I forget.
Bennett Amalu.
That's it, Bennett Amalu. So that's who it was. And so we did this interview. So this would have been 16 years ago. And in the interview, he was telling us, like, look, we've been doing more and more research and more. I mean, you've seen the movie, so you know what it's about. I mean, he was waving this flag, right? And people were like, oh, come on. And we didn't even, my point being to the story is I don't think we ever aired the interview because we just didn't. It was like, well, this is kind of out of left field. Well, he was way ahead of his time, right? And he was basically setting off and making everybody alert and aware of this forewarning about what then we saw not before our very eyes, literally, but we started seeing the Dave Dewersons and the Junior Seaus and the Jim McMahons, where we're like, whoa, wait a minute, something's going on here. So because of that, and because that movie in particular created this image that the NFL was aware of but dismissive of, or aware of, and again, I'm saying image, I'm not saying reality, but the perception was that the NFL had dismissed the importance and severity of neurological damage that was being done by playing the sport. And therefore, I can totally see why now how the NFL, you could say that it's because of the Players Association or an increased awareness and protection of the players, but it also, to a little bit of an extent, Jimmy, let's be honest, is about an awareness and a protection of the brand, right? Because now they are maybe even overcompensatory and overprotective because they see, oh gosh, these people were right.
Yes.
But I'm glad of that. I'm not damning them for it. I'm glad that it worked out that way, but let's be real. There probably is as much a part of it about like just the imagery of all of it as anything else.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I wish it wouldn't have taken as long as it did. I'm sure former players wish it wouldn't have taken as long as it did. But oftentimes, whenever you find something groundbreaking or something that's going to shake, whether it's sports, whether it's life, something of the very institution you believe in, you get pushback.
There are a couple of players in this market. When I say in this market, I don't mean that live here. I mean former Colt players that I know that people would be surprised. It's sad. There are a couple that I've seen lately that I like, that I've gotten to know as people, and it's tough, man. They're struggling, they're unhealthy, their body is starting to break down, starting at the epicenter, which is their brain, because of hits, and they were, hit a smelling salt and go back out kind of guys, right? I have a question for you guys, by the way, on a totally different subject. Are we still doing the threads? Jimmy, when's the last time you did you open a threads account?
Yeah, that first week was great. I think I made one post. I have not been on since.
Like, I have a threads account, which is basically the Facebook version of Twitter, right?
Yep.
And I think like most people, now here's the problem I have with this. Again, I'm still having this problem, and I'm needing you guys for tech support. But
are you still on there actively?
Well, no, not actively. I got an account just because I thought, okay, if Twitter is going to go away and this thing takes over, I want to make sure that I have the username cornered.
Absolutely.
So, because to Eddie's point, there is another Jake Query. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I don't think we're related. He lives in Noblesville, younger guy. But I thought, well, I'm going to beat this guy to the punch, right? So in order to get a Threads account, which I was doing, preemptively, in order to get that account, I had to open an Instagram account, right?
Yes.
I know that most people have had Instagram for a long time. I did not. The Instagram thing is a little confusing to me. Whenever I open it, all I see is Britney Spears in a bikini dancing around. That's the only thing that I see.
Do you follow anybody?
I don't know. I think so.
Like, do you have?
But apparently, and I don't know that I follow Britney Spears. I must be, because every time I open it up, like right now, I'm gonna push on my phone the Instagram thing.
All right.
And then I'm gonna turn it around and you tell me what's on there.
All right.
You ready? Oh, wait a minute. Okay, hold on. It's just a bunch of different things now. Oh, here we go. I'm going to the homepage.
There you go. Good call.
What is it?
It appears to be somebody in a bikini. I can't read the Twitter handle or the Instagram handle from here, but yes, somebody in a bikini with a.
Eddie?
Okay, looks like something from People magazine.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, who am I looking? It's Britney Spears. It's Britney Spears in a pool in a bikini. That's all. I think I'm following a bunch of people. But at any rate, the threads thing, I think, because now I'm getting notifications when somebody like sends me a thread, and I'm like, I don't think anybody's doing this anymore. So am I safe to just go ahead for now and delete the app?
Yeah, I don't have the app anymore. Occasionally I'll get a notification that says 4 people followed you. I look at it, they're all bots. I'm like, okay, that's cool.
It's those same people that are
all that content I've been churning out. One post.
I never made an account, so I never experienced it.
It was a great little stretch. I love it because it felt like first day of school vibes because no one really knew what to do, and every post was like, okay, I'm here on Threads now.
Right.
You'd see like Ford making a post or ESPN making a post.
But but Threads, you have all of the threads that I was getting were either people that I follow from and they were out of order.
Yeah.
Or people I don't follow, and I'm like, this is exactly why I was jumping over here, was to not see this idiot anymore, right?
Yes.
It was very frustrating.
Let Bill Estes put you behind the wheel of the powerhouse brand.
Day that feels like a Wednesday. Although now I'm starting to get the feeling that, in fact, tomorrow is the start of yet another 3-day weekend, right?
Right. Like this week in its best, and I'm very, obviously, we don't do a real job. I'm very happy to be in here. But if you're an everyday worker, I would hope that you're likely at home listening to us right now because this is, again, punt week 2 in the back-to-back to end any given year.
Well, the week midway through on a Hump Day Wednesday is when we found out the finalist for the NFL, or rather the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Reggie Wayne's on it. Dwight Freeney's on it. We are efforting to use a term that's not really a word, Dwight Freeney, on the program within the next couple of days. But Reggie Wayne did speak earlier. Of course, he is the wide receiver coach for the Colts. He is eligible. He had the following to say that Eddie has come up with.
Oh, man, I mean, it is what it is. It's a lot of stuff I've waited on in my lifetime, right? I've, in the same situation, I've waited on to become the number 1 receiver for the Colts for 6-7 years. You know what I mean? So I don't have a problem with waiting. I've waited on a lot of stuff. I didn't always get that BMX bike when I was a kid, right? I didn't get that Nintendo right when it came out, so you got to wait. You got to wait till, your numbers call or your opportunity, and when it does, you just got to answer the bell.
So, again, we went over whether or not that wait is going to come to an end and he's going to get in. I do think, and listen, I love Reggie Wayne. Loved him as a player. Loved him as a guy. I did a show with him for multiple seasons and probably from a media standpoint was around him as much as anybody, and saw, up close the commitment to the franchise, to his body, to his craft, all of it. Great respect for him. And do I think he should be in? I do. But I also think that at no fault of his, he plays the position that is probably the most challenging because, number one, there are a lot of great players at it. And number two, it is the position that comes with the highest amount of caveat. Well, that guy's a product of the system. Well, that guy played with this guy. Well, that guy had this quarterback. I mean, quite frankly, part of what might hurt him, ironically enough or strangely enough, is the fact that he played with Peyton Manning, because I think there are a lot of people that look at it and go, the same thing with Julian Edelman. Like, we look at, now he's a better player.
I want to re-clarify the statement.
He's a
Reggie
better
Wayne
player than
belongs
Edelman.
in, like, far before we have any Julian Edelman conversation.
But Edelman, though, I mean, there are a lot of people that are going to look at Edelman and go, well, you know,
Tom Brady, look who he played around.
Correct.
Yeah.
He was just insert. You know, Tom Brady, I'll tell you an interesting
Wayne
fact.
has a standalone resume, though. I'm sorry to cut you off, but, like, you put Wayne let's I know you can't take out Peyton, but if you put Wayne with any other great quarterback of that era, he puts up the same numbers. Maybe better if Marvin Harrison's not next to him, right? Like, he has enough, unlike the Edelman case, where you can clearly point and say, yeah, he's a Hall of Famer.
The Tom Brady, by the way, I believe this is still the case, and it probably will forever be the case. To me, it's Tom Brady won how many Super Bowls?
7. 6 in New England.
Of the 6 that he won in New England, he did not win a single Super Bowl in New England with a Hall of Fame wide receiver.
Yes, because they didn't win when Moss was there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's impressive.
In
right?
today's NFL, tight ends are just as important. Like Gronk carried weight.
Yeah. Well,
but yes. By what you're saying, that's true.
And you're right. Gronk was basically a wide receiver.
It's like,
I mean, it's kind of a trick question
correct.
almost, right?
Correct.
Because Gronk was he was as big literally as big a threat as you could get.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? From a receiving standpoint. You know, this Raiders game with the Colts is whoever would have guessed from either side that this was going to be this big on the penultimate game of the season.
I mean, I would never have going into the year. But from a Raiders standpoint, I mean, you're still crossing T's, dotting I's, saying your prayers, and hoping for the best, because they still need a ton to happen. Whereas the Colts, you win 2, you're basically in. Like that, the New York Times model is one of the more popular ones to use for playoff simulations. 99% chance for the Colts if they win out. Like, you're getting in if you win these next 2 games. For the Raiders, you need that to happen, and then the Chiefs to continue to piss down their leg.
Now,
and other
just so you know, because we're now on the same floor as our friends over at IBC, don't mention the reliability of that New York Times research across the hall, right? We don't want any sort of a Giannis type issue.
Okay.
I'm here to help.
I appreciate that. I'll keep it in mind.
I want to make sure. Matt Taylor is the voice of the Colts, and he's also our next guest.
The Ride with JMV.
Hey, simply put.
Minutes, the voice of the Colts. Again, if you are just joining us, where have you been? The news from the Colts complex today. Braden Smith back out on the practice field, second day in a row. Michael Pittman Jr. practicing and no red non-contact jersey, which would mean that it would appear he is taking the first step through the concussion protocol and moving his way out of it. But to Eddie's point, which is a very good one, at any point that could, when it comes to concussions, you just don't know, right? Zach Moss also back on the practice field. Suddenly they're a team that has like riches in the backfield, Jimmy, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of depth throughout the course of the year, ignoring the absence of Jonathan Taylor for part of it, whether it's been Trey Sermon, whether it's been Zach Moss. They've had options there to balance out the running game. But if the injury report goes the way it could go this week, I need a kind of, it's 2021 Jonathan Taylor type performance going into this weekend against Las Vegas and really in the entire stretch run of this push, the final 2 games.
So we now have Matt Taylor on the program, and Matt, we'll begin with this. Football aside, because I know it was a disappointment for Colts fans in Atlanta. But aside from that, good holiday for you?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Got home at a very reasonable time on Christmas Eve. I think got back around 7:45 and had plenty of time to get ready for Santa and play with the kids the next day. Got woken up about, 6 a.m. On Christmas Day and went down and, unwrapped some presents from Santa and then spent some time with some family. So, no, it was a really good holiday despite it starting, losing by 19 points the day before. But all things into perspective, really good, really fun day.
Matt, one of the things that I learned from you last week that I found interesting is that you had mentioned, for those that didn't hear it, that when you were a kid, Santa at your house, and I don't know if you guys just lived in a more remote area of Indy, or if Santa needed a break, maybe you left out good cookies. Santa would actually put the toys together at your house, right? Before going back up the chimney. Now, does he do that for your kids as well, or did Santa retire from that?
I wanted to ask this. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, no, Santa lives on. Santa brought the big stuff. Santa brings the big things. Santa brought like bikes and one year Santa brought like a little miniature Papa Shot for the basement, and those things were all out of the box. And Santa put those together so that we could come down right away and start playing with them. I mentioned I got a Sega from Santa that was already, put together out of the box, hooked up to the TV, so you could just start playing right away. So that's absolutely what we do for our kids too when Santa comes.
Are you a Papa Shot fiend, Matt? You put in work against the kids, against whoever? How do you do?
I mean, when the neighborhood kids came over, Jimmy, they had no chance, pal. They had no chance. Yeah.
That's right.
So. Absolutely. I had home court advantage. You knew where all the sweet spots were. You knew where the floor kind of leaned to one direction or the other, so you can kind of account for that. There's no doubt those kids. So we had a ping pong table one time from Santa, so they got worked over too. The neighborhood kids just got hustled.
Wait, did you say when you were a kid, did you have a basement?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've always felt like social supremacy for childhood is determined by 2 things: whether you have a basement and then how much junk food your mom buys, right?
Well, I had one out of 2 of those things, because the basement, I turned the basement into everything, Jake. I had a big imagination as a kid, so I would turn the basement into a movie theater. I turned it into Market Square Arena and played basketball down there by myself. I turned it into IMS in the month of May. I turned it into a racetrack. But my mom would go to Kroger once a week, and when the food was out, the food was out.
Yep.
So we didn't have the junk food department. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom was like, "Would you like some Wheat Thins?" I'm like, "Mom, no. People want Twinkies. What are we doing here?" Okay, Matt, this one I was saying, to use your imagination, young Matt Taylor or a kid like that was looking at the Colts schedule and probably in August was saying, we're going to have to get pretty imaginative in order to make the Colts-Raiders game in December be one that's a big one. And yet here we are. This is big not only for the Colts, but I think the thing that's dangerous, Matt, is this is a pretty big one for the Raiders too, because the division's still in play for them. So a lot on the line. Let's begin with Indianapolis from the health standpoint, where things are and where you anticipate them being for this one.
Well, I mean, the big one obviously is Michael Pittman Jr., and it was really unfortunate the fact that he, cleared protocol, but then traveled to Atlanta, and then those symptoms crept back up. I mean, that's the nature of the beast with the concussion protocol, man. You just never know. And so he's right back into the protocol this week, having to clear those same 5 hurdles that he did last week. But, you kind of feel this week like you felt last week in terms of being encouraged. I mean, he's still practicing. He's practicing again today, and we'll find out if it's a full designation or what in a couple of hours. But you feel encouraged about where he's at. Jonathan Taylor seems to be okay in terms of, handling the workload. I think he had 18 carries the other day, and, he seems to be healthy and able to kind of bounce back with the right thumb injury that he had, missing 3 games. So he looks to be okay. Zach Moss is practicing today. Again, we'll find out if it's full or limited in just a little bit. So injury-wise and health-wise, you feel good. You're optimistic about where this team is at. But again, we got a long way to go between, especially with Pittman's case, between now and Sunday. But those are big. I mean, the Colts just had a hard time, pushing the ball outside the numbers and stretching the field vertically on Sunday. I mean, I think the outside receivers combined for 4 catches for just over 30 yards, if I'm not mistaken. You had some drops in there. So there's no question they felt the loss or the absence in this case of Michael Pittman Jr. not being able to go in Atlanta.
Matt, if I look at the Colts roster, and you mentioned that Atlanta game, it's one obviously we highlighted in depth earlier in the week. But if I look at the Colts roster in 2023, and I don't want him to rush back. We put that clarifier on there to start. I don't want Michael Pittman Jr. to rush back. If he feels symptoms again, it's not worth it. His long-term health's more important. But when you take him away, is it fair to say that's just one offensive weapon taken away, too much for what's been an already tough year for the Colts when you look at some of the players they've lost, most notably Anthony Richardson? Is it fair to say his absence is one bridge too far? And if it's unfair, why? And what would you point to as, no, if this happens, they're still okay?
Well, I mean, you only have the one game to go off of, and it's a small sample size, but it is an indication of how tough it was for the Colts to move the ball. I mean, they scripted, obviously, the first series, and it went well, scoring a touchdown. But then after that, again, you had DJ Montgomery and Alec Pierce combining for only 4 catches. You had some drops, some pivotal mistimed drops, around midfield or a third down that would have continued drives for the Colts. So they got to get that cleaned up. But, I think it's fair to say, again, in a short sample size, the Colts had a really difficult time moving the ball and, again, stretching the field. I mean, they had 92 rushing yards last week, but it felt like it was less than that, to be honest with you, because of all the short gains, the 1 and 2 yard gains by Jonathan Taylor. It's almost like the Colts were playing on a 15-yard field, without Michael Pittman Jr. Again, not being able to stretch it outside the numbers, and teams are just playing so close to the line of scrimmage, knowing that they did not have anybody to be able to kind of just take over the game in the passing game, and that's what the Colts have kind of done here. And again, not taking anything away from Montgomery's ability against the Steelers to step up and play well, but when you lose Michael Pittman Jr., like that, I think that's like 30% of the team's catch percentage. Where I think Pittman ranks second in the NFL in terms of catch percentage for a team, so an incredibly high number. So a lot of targets and a lot of catches going to one guy. And you got to give Michael Pittman Jr. a lot of credit because teams know that or have known that this season, and yet he's still coming up with huge catches in big moments, third down, red zone, getting in the end zone, all of those things. So he's a true difference maker. And, throughout the course of 4 quarters in Atlanta, it was really difficult for the Colts to move the ball, specifically because so many teams, or so many players, I should say, those linebackers playing so close in the line of scrimmage. It was hard for the Colts to run between the guards, and they try to get some things going on the outside, but it was just kind of too much of an order for Jonathan Taylor to be patient and squeak out. I mean, he would do that a couple of times, but it would only be, for 3 and 4 yards at a time. So just the big playability wasn't there against Atlanta. And again, in one small sample size, without Michael Pittman Jr., it was really hard for the Colts.
Matt Taylor's our guest, the voice of the Colts. Colts and Raiders coming up here in this, the second to last game of the regular season. Of course, the playoffs very much in play for both franchises. Matt, I thought Gus Bradley made a really interesting point when he was asked about why they weren't getting to the quarterback when they were playing Atlanta, and he was saying, look, part of that is because their running game was such that we just couldn't gamble by bringing too much pressure on that, and we kind of had to load up things in terms of the running game itself. Do you think that continues? How much have you gotten a chance to see what the Raiders might be able to do and what the Raiders with Aiden O'Connell, who is not a guy who's yet as established through the air, will they also try to basically do death by paper cuts from the running game?
No, it's a great observation by you, and it was spot on because the Falcons killed the Colts on play action because of how good their running game was, and they gashed the Colts with some misdirection runs. You had some counters in there, you had some quick sweeps into the boundary, and just it was a really poor tackling game by the Colts as well. I think the Colts missed over 20 tackles in that game, I read. So a really disappointing game, just in terms of the fundamentals, if you will, for the Colts defense. And that's going to be something to watch out for in terms of the Raiders and how they counter with that. And if you look at the Raiders offense, they got Aiden O'Connell. He's a rookie. And for the most part this year, he's played like a rookie, just over 60% completion percentage. I think he's got 8 touchdowns to 7 picks. And everybody knows about last week, the struggles really from the end of the first quarter on. He didn't complete a single pass. He misfired on his last 10 passing attempts. So they really ran the ball really, really well. And they're kind of a deceptive team right now on both sides of the ball. But specifically, I would say on offense, you look at their numbers, they're 31st in the NFL in rushing, right? So that's second to last in the league. But since Antonio Pierce took over, they've got a different identity. And for whatever reason, they're running the ball way more effectively now than they did in their first 8 games of the year. Their last 7 games, they're over 100 yards in 5 of those games. Last week, they ripped off like a $157 against the Chiefs, and that was really the part of their offense that they relied on, obviously with O'Connell struggling in the passing game. Kazir White came in, ran the ball really, really well. So the Colts are going to have to contend with that. And, I know Grover Stewart's back, but it's not like he's the magic elixir in trying to slow down the run, because the Colts have given up, 100 yards in 8 of their last 9 games. And Grover is back, but teams are still able to run the ball and get chunk plays on the Colts. They got to get that figured out. That's part of their defense that I think I am most surprised by, let's say, consistently throughout the season, is just how much teams or how well teams have been able to run the ball on this Colts front, considering they were so good in that department for most of last year. So in the final 2 games, that's the part of the defense I want to see kind of step outside of themselves and get things cleaned up. And if they can do that, stop the other team's running ability, obviously would set themselves up very favorably down and distance-wise, get the pass rush going, and make life uncomfortable for a rookie quarterback in Aiden O'Connell.
Voice of the Colts, Matt Taylor, is our guest, brought to you by Showing Materials, concrete and aggregate experts. Matt, when you look at what the Colts have faced in terms of opposing defensive ends, and then you look at what's on the table in terms of that matchup against the Raiders, Max Crosby's one of the best defensive ends in the league. There's no doubt about that. He's just a walking, running, wrecking ball. And then the last couple of weeks, Malcolm Kuntz has done a wonderful job in terms of his numbers and being like a complementary piece there that have given teams fits. Obviously, getting Braden Smith in terms of the totality of the line is great for the Colts. But when you look at that particular matchup in the trenches, where does that rank in terms of what they've faced previously, and how do you think they'll handle that pressure on Sunday coming from both ends?
Well, it's big for Braden Smith to come back, because primarily you've got Crosby that lines up over the right tackle. Now, they move him around a little bit, but that's kind of where he lives. And, just watching the Raiders, the little that I have this year, and then kind of studying them on tape, they line him up over the tackle. They line him way outside the tackle box so he can get a head start, kind of that takes that appropriate harsh angle to the quarterback. They move him inside. They run stunts, some twists. So he's going to be lined up over the guards at times as well. but you're exactly right. I mean, Crosby and Kuntz especially, he's having kind of a breakout year this year. Not a lot of people were familiar with this guy, but I think those two players, Crosby and Kuntz, combined for like 51% of the team's sack total. And if you just watched the game last week, I thought the Raiders did a fantastic job, just a phenomenal job of lane integrity, right, pass rush, discipline, because Patrick Mahomes, he was flustered all game long, and he kept, rolling out and then was hemmed in by, the guy on the left side of the pass rush. Then would baseball turn his way from traffic, and there'd be another guy in his face. So they just kept pushing him backwards, kept pushing that pocket away from the line of scrimmage. And the Colts did that, actually. I know this is kind of a tangent, but the Colts did that against Mahomes a couple years ago. Actually, last year in Week 3, they did a really good job of that. And I think the Raiders took a page from that in their pass rush integrity. So I was just really impressed with their overall consistency, being able to get in the face of Mahomes. They didn't get him, a ton in terms of the sacks. I think they got 4, which is a good number, but it's not like 7 or 8. But they made him very uncomfortable for the most of it, for the majority of that ball game. And I was just really impressed with Crosby, but more specifically Kuntz, because you know what Crosby is. You know he's going to get his 12 to 13 sacks. He's got 13.5 sacks so far this year. He's second in the NFL in tackles for loss. But Malcolm Kuntz, I was really taken aback by how disruptive he was, and he's definitely on the Colts' radar this week.
Matt, when watching the NFL, which you've obviously done a lot of, goes without saying, I think everybody can like a player that just goes out and plays at a level that almost exceeds almost like they're the last person to realize they're not supposed to be doing what they're doing on the field. You know what I mean? Like the underdog story. Everybody likes the underdog story, right? While we're sitting here talking, I'm looking up things about the Colts and the Raiders game. And somebody in the 453 section of Lucas Oil Stadium, which is a fine seat. I mean, you're right there in the end zone. You got a really good view of watching the play develop. Somebody's got 2 tickets for sale on the resale market for $9,000 a piece. Now, that seems like optimistic, does it not?
Are you being for real?
Yeah. There's 2. I'm looking right here. Lodge level 453, row 13, 2 tickets for sale, $9,061 each. Now, if that guy, let me tell you something. Here's what we need. If that guy sells that, we need them selling advertising on this radio station, right? I mean,
no kidding.
I mean, that's impressive, is it not?
Yeah, that guy can sell ice to an Eskimo right there. I mean,
no question. Yeah, he's currently selling popsicles to guys, or ketchup popsicles to guys in white suits. That's impressive. $9,000. Hey,
I mean, does he realize the Colts have a game the following week as well?
Yeah, those are $11,000. That's right. So I'm curious of this, though. Kidding aside, in the games that you've watched, Matt, in the times that you've done this, when we get to this point in the year, do teams experiment at all with giving, and maybe this is more of a playoff question, but for these two teams, the playoffs are on the line, right? You got to push all in. Do teams come up with new wrinkles at all at this point, or is it really a matter of this is the time of year where you should have honed what you do best and pushed those chips in, and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think for the most part, you practice the way that you operate. I mean, you kind of are who you are in terms of your culture and your identity, and what you're about in terms of your preparation, the way you meet, the timing of things. I don't think you screw with that, because for the most part, it's worked, right? I mean, you're 8-7. You're still on a little bit of a run here, after the Germany game. So from a culture standpoint, I don't think you change anything, because you don't want to deviate from your routine and how you go about your business as a professional organization, if you will. But obviously, yes. I mean, every single week you're putting in a new set of plays. You're putting in, what works against that defense, and try to get the advantage there. As you watch a lot of tape, you're always putting in things that have worked against the Raiders defense, or some blitzes and stunts that have gotten to Aiden O'Connell against their offensive line. So you're always kind of game specific, and we see that on a week-to-week basis under Shane Steichen. There's always a handful of plays that kind of look as the outliers from what the Colts, traditionally run, schematically on offense. I mean, I think I talked about it last week. Is that play they called Germany. It was that kind of like reverse or flea flicker pass back to Gardner Minshew where he threw it down the field to Kylan Granson. That was the play they had up for the Germany game, which is why they called it that. But they didn't. It didn't get called in that game, but they kept it in the playbook and kept it as the same name. So you're always going to have plays like that that are game specific, that sort of gets you the edge schematically against your opponent that week. That may not work, week to week if you're playing a different team.
Matt, the game, and you had mentioned that, I mean, if these are $9,000 seats, imagine what it's going to be against the Houston Texans to end out the year. C.J. Stroud coming, I think he's back in practice, fine young player for the Texans who have also had probably an exceed expectation season. Was the best case scenario, and I know, Matt, listen, I get it. I get that players are going to tell you till the cows come home that they don't overlook things, that they take everything serious, that it's 1 week at a time. I get all that. But is the best case scenario perhaps for the Colts the fact that the Raiders beat the Chiefs, because it kind of perks up your antenna and you go, okay, these guys are playing for real and they ain't messing around. Whereas if they'd gone in and gotten beat as we thought they would by Kansas City, then perhaps this becomes an even bigger trap game because of what's next.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think it helps to the fact that the Colts got handled pretty easily in Atlanta, right? I mean, you got to be fair about that. They got handled, and now they have to think about the fact that they had an opportunity slip through their fingertips, a golden opportunity. Had they won that game, they'd be in first place in the division right now, and they know that, right? And I love what Gardner Minshew said after the game, right, to paraphrase him. You can't worry about, we beat this team, they beat that team, and so we have the tiebreaker. No, I mean, forget that, dude. Like, it's not about that anymore. You got to go out and take care of your own business, and it's all about perspective. I mean, Gardner Minshew specifically, he's like a lot of guys in the NFL, and certainly within that Colts locker room, but you're guaranteed nothing. You're guaranteed absolutely nothing. You're not even guaranteed tomorrow. I mean, they can cut you at any time. And so when you're on the doorstep to make the playoffs, you got to capitalize, because you don't know when that opportunity is going to come for you to get a chance to play in the postseason and have a chance to reach the Super Bowl. Every kid's dream, right? So I love what he said after the game. And I also think that, too, yes, I mean, with the Raiders handling the Chiefs in Arrowhead, on the road, making a statement, standalone window, national audience, all of that stuff, I do think it sends a message to the Colts that, hey, even though this team is, under 500, they're not playing like a 7-8 football team. This is a team that's pretty dialed in right now, and pretty motivated under an interim head coach, Antonio Pierce. So I think that helps the Colts psychologically. But on the other side of the coin, I'm really interested, and I don't know to what degree maybe the Colts felt this last week coming off that win against Pittsburgh. Psychologically, that was a really important game for the Colts, right? I mean, it was an AFC game. Pittsburgh had the same record as the Colts. I mean, all of that stuff. Plus, Pittsburgh had beaten the Colts 8 straight times, hadn't beat Pittsburgh since 2008, all of that. So kind of a big exhale for the Colts at the end of that game. Like, all right, we got the monkey off our back a little bit. We can stop talking about Pittsburgh's dominance over us. All that's kind of the bed. Well, the Raiders had all of that. I mean, Jimmy, you can attest to this, being the Chiefs fan, and I know that you are. I mean, what was it, 6 straight losses for the Raiders against the Chiefs? Patrick Mahomes had just dominated that franchise. So I think just watching the game, you look at Antonio Pierce on the sidelines. I mean, you just look at his face. He's just, very relieved at the end of that game, takes a big sigh of relief, a big exhale on the sidelines, and talk about the disrespect that the Raiders had been getting over the years from the Chiefs. So from an emotional standpoint, I'm just really interested to see how the Raiders come back and how much intensity they have about them against the Colts in this game, knowing last week they put in so much emotionally to try to beat Kansas City on a big stage.
Yeah, something tells me they're not going to be smoking cigars in the locker room if they win at Lucas Oil on Sunday.
Right,
He's Matt Taylor, the voice of the Colts, brought to us by Shelby Materials, the concrete and aggregate experts. Mate, enjoy the call. Happy New Year to you and your family, and we will talk to you in 2024.
Indeed. Happy New Year, guys. Thanks.
By the way, if you want to sit in section 642, if you look up and behind you, you'd be able to see into the press box, which is cool. But you can do that, and this is a value at twice the price. For just $11,754, you can sit in that section. Now, Will Haskett asks an interesting question. Would you pay that if it came with Taylor Swift tickets upcoming? I don't know what those would resell for, though, right? If you did it that way, I mean, there's a strategy there, right? Now, I'll tell you the one that's going to blow people away is the All-Star Game. Like, people around here that think, like, oh, the All-Star Game's coming in February. It's going to be fun. We're going to go down. I'm going to try to get some tickets, take the kids.
No. You take early looks at that secondary market right now. It is not.
What do you think right now is the entry price for the All-Star Game? What's the entry-level price for the All-Star Game? On the secondary market.
3,400.
Just to get in the building, right?
Yeah.
For the game,
it's
the
already
game itself.
The All-Star Saturdays at Lucas. To get in like the 400 or 600 level, it's like $600 a ticket. Maybe I'm underselling that too. I haven't looked in a while, but that's what it was when I last checked.
Considering that when I put in All-Star Game, the first thing it takes me to is the NHL All-Star Game, probably means there's not a lot of tickets available.
Yeah.
We'll look at it, take a look at it, and we also are going to go on the road. So what are you taking on the road trip, Jimmy? What music are we playing on the road trip? We're going all the way out to Vegas.
I think we're going to, in honor of some of Eddie's playlists today, we're going to just listen to the whole Grease soundtrack. I think that's our road trip music.
Fair enough.
No, a lot of Elvis since we're taking the trip to Vegas.
Fair enough. Our road trip to Las Vegas with JT the Brick, talking about the Raiders, is next.
If you're struggling with opioids, you are not
And our road trip getting us set for actually the Raiders that are going to be coming here to Lucas Oil Stadium, but it takes us out to Las Vegas to talk to a guy who really needs no introduction when it comes to sports talk radio and our line of work. Most of you have heard him over the course of the years talking national sports, and also a member of Raider Nation Radio in the Las Vegas Sports Network. JT the Brick joins us. First off, JT, happy holidays to you. And who in the world would have guessed in August that we'd be talking about a game of this magnitude between the Colts and the Raiders?
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. Happy New Year. Massive game for the Raiders, and obviously the Colts are a game ahead of the Raiders. So it's an elimination game. Winner move forward, loser go home. And I think both franchises expected that. You know, Josh McDaniels, the head coach of the Raiders, before he got fired, had those expectations when he announced Jimmy Garoppolo, along with Devontae Adams, the leading rusher in the NFL, Josh Jacobs, and Mad Max Crosby, one of the best defensive players in football. But out here in Vegas, we've had a turn of events. Jimmy Garoppolo's bench, Josh McDaniels got fired, but now it's about Antonio Pierce, who came in as the interim head coach and has this team flying around, doing things defensively that they haven't done since Charles Woodson played with the Raiders and Rod Woodson and some pretty good players here. The defense has found new life, and now the Raiders have life.
So with that, JT, I guess the question becomes, is it a schematic change that took place for the Raiders, or was it literally just a change of voice and belief for the roster that was there in terms of what they've been able to do defensively to get to this spot?
Great question. It's more the voice, because Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, is the same defensive coordinator that has been here for a couple of years, and he is fantastic. And, at the beginning, his first year or so, people were calling for his job. And now people are wondering if he'll be another head coach in this league. Another team will take a shot at him because he's done such a good job with the defense. The Raiders got Max Crosby to an even higher level. This guy, Malcolm Kuntz, who had 3 sacks against Mahomes, the only player ever to get 3 sacks in a game against Mahomes. Malcolm Kuntz on the other side is playing really hard. They brought in a new linebacker in Robert Spillane. And then I hope you guys know the story, or you're finding it, with Jack Jones, who Antonio Pierce coached in high school at Long Beach Poly, brought to ASU, then brought to the Raiders from the Patriots. He had back-to-back pick sixes in the last 2 games, where the Raiders scored 63 against the Chargers and beat Kansas City and Arrowhead. So their defense, it's kind of the same scheme, but to answer your question, the players have a much bigger voice. What's happened since the failure of Josh McDaniels was he coached the team, he made every decision, he wrote up every scheme, and you had to follow it. Now you got a guy saying to players, come in my office, what do you want to do? What do you like to do? What are you better at? What are we not doing to get you involved more? And that communication has led to the Raiders having cigar parties in the locker room after they win. They're celebrating regular season victories because they feel like they've been unleashed.
JT, is Antonio Pierce the clubhouse front runner for this head coaching job when all's said and done, or will there be a full search, you think, by the Davis family?
Well, that's another question. That's a tough one for me because I work for the coach. Now I work for Josh McDaniels. Now I work for Antonio Pierce. I think he clearly proved now that he deserves the opportunity to be the head coach or be the front runner, as you said there, because Mark Davis made a really big vetted decision when it came to McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. That wasn't just, hey, throw a name up against the wall. They really tried to build a new Raiders with the former regime, and it was very well thought out and very vetted. It just didn't work. Unfortunately, it didn't work for a number of reasons. So we'll see what Mark does here in the offseason, because he let the former interim head coach go, and Rich Bisaccia, who won his last 4 games, including beating Indy to get the Raiders into the playoffs. And Antonio Pierce is kind of building the same model, but Pierce has done everything. He grew up a Raider fan in Compton. He's connected to Raider Nation. I mean, this is special what he's doing, but Mark Davis is going to follow the protocol of the league and probably take some time in the offseason. Or maybe he makes that decision 24 hours after the last game if the Raiders make it to the playoffs in theory. But, back to this game, this is a must-win game for the Raiders. No matter what happened in Kansas City, we're on a short week heading into Indy playing a team that has a better record than the Raiders, who are now surging.
And with that, JT, we talked about the defense, right? Offensively for the Raiders. JT the Brick, by the way, is our guest here on the Thursday Road Trip, brought to you by AAA. Aiden O'Connell's a guy that everybody here is familiar with because of his Purdue ties, but I don't know that people – and I think there were people that thought, given an opportunity, he could play his way in the league. What has Vegas done, if anything, I guess, to allow and assimilate for his transition into the NFL? In other words, are they not asking a lot of him and he's just kind of a scheme guy? How have things worked with him that have also found some success for him?
Yeah, I think the best thing to say, Jake, is he's a work in progress. He's not very mobile. And I cannot believe I'm talking to you after a Monday where he didn't complete a pass in the second, third, and fourth quarter. Let that sink in. He didn't complete a pass. Devontae Adams had one reception for 4 yards.
And they won, right?
Yeah,
and they won.
They won. And they won because they could not throw it in the second half. And Zamir White, who's taken over for Josh Jacobs, and Josh Jacobs could play this week. We'll find out. They knew that their better chance was going to be to run the football because Aiden – I asked the coach today. I'm the only one who has an interview with the head coach every week, and I just did it this morning. And I asked him, what was it? Was it the timing? Was it the rhythm? He said, yeah, it was a combination of all of it. Aiden was a little bit off with Devontae. He wasn't hitting guys in stride. They wanted to lean heavy on the run, which worked out pretty well for him in that game. But, Aiden's had a couple of big moments. He's the quarterback of the team. The franchise record is 63 points. 8 guys scored in that game, 3 on defense. Ken Stabler, Jim Plunkett, Tom Flores, who had the record of 6 touchdowns. Aiden O'Connell is the quarterback's name who's on the franchise most points of 63. And Aiden O'Connell won his first ever game at Arrowhead against Patrick Mahomes. He managed the game. He did what he had to do. But I'm interested to see what happens here against the Colts because the Raiders can't win the game the way they won at Kansas City. I mean, I think they'll score a defensive touchdown maybe. They'll make a turnover for sure against Gardner Minshew. But Aiden O'Connell's going to have to attack the end zone. And what disappointed me in the last game is he didn't throw it in the end zone. They weren't throwing it past the marker on third down. They took a major step backwards with the elite passing game they had to put up 63. Because remember, the reason why we're behind the Indianapolis Colts is 2 weeks ago, we scored 0 points against Minnesota. Minnesota won 3-0. It put football back 100 years.
That's right.
If we would have beat Minnesota and had the 1-game lead, we'd control our destiny. I think we'd win one of the next 2 games and be in. We're fighting for our lives because we lost to Tyson Bagent in Chicago, which got the head coach fired, and we lost 3-0 to the Minnesota Vikings. Other than that, there's some pretty good storylines, I think you'd admit, coming from Vegas.
I'm curious about this, JT, and I know you got a show to do here, so we'll let you go in a minute. But one of the things I think would be a challenge for the Raiders, and I'm curious if this is still the case, is because they're a relocate. Now, there's no greater, honestly, like the Raiders franchise is the most perfect fit for the city of Las Vegas ever. That said, it's a destination location where fans are like, oh, man, awesome. Our team's playing in Vegas. Let's go. Mm-hmm. So are they a franchise that doesn't necessarily have home field advantage, or has Henderson and Las Vegas completely wrapped their arms around the franchise to the point where they still have that advantage at home? Or is it kind of like a neutral field game every time they play?
Well, there's been a couple of neutral field games, and that's been when the Niners were here, very quick trip. Look, Minnesota had more fans. Our number 1 selling resale ticket of the entire year was the Minnesota Vikings. And we had to deal with the Chiefs, and they travel with an army, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. How about that? We played them this year. So here's the way I look at this, Jake. Every fan that comes through for the first time ever is going to make their first ever road trip to Vegas. Like, if your team hasn't played here yet, and this year the Giants and the Jets hadn't played here yet, so their fans came. But there's a huge Raider Nation crowd there. And if it's 50-50 for the first couple of years until the Raiders get to the playoffs, I can guarantee you this. Once the Raiders get it right, and they hadn't got it right with Josh McDaniels and the John Gruden emails, which is going to be a big story coming up here, his legality fight with the NFL, which he will win. He will win. When we look back at the history of the Las Vegas Raiders, unfortunately, Henry Ruggs COVID years, this, that, our stadium opened up first game ever with no fans, first year with COVID. You add all that into play, all the other fans wanting to come out here. Raiders have done pretty good. That's why we have the Super Bowl, and we have the number one revenue team in the NFL behind the Dallas Cowboys. We're number 2 when it comes to revenue. We were dead last in Oakland. You've been to Oakland before.
Oh, yeah.
So the franchise is on strong ground with revenue. But fans don't care about revenue, and we have the best concerts in the world at halftime. You come to our games, and you can get everything from Ice Cube to Sammy Hagar and these massive concerts, but we need to win games. The Raider Nation in Vegas needs to win, and that hasn't happened yet. One playoff appearance. We got a miracle shot. We're in the middle of a Hail Mary, but it's only going to happen if we can get through the Indianapolis Colts.
Okay, lastly, JT, I'm coming out in a couple of months to go to the Sphere. Have you been to the Sphere yet? Have you seen a show there?
Yes, I've seen you two there twice. It is not even close. It's the greatest concert venue in the world. I'm assuming you're coming out for Fish or maybe another show.
I'm coming out for you too.
Coming out for you too. It's like nothing I've ever seen. I grew up in New York, grew up at Madison Square Garden, seen the Rolling Stones in Europe a few times. Nothing ever is close to this. A matter of fact, if you go see a show at the Sphere, which is U2, you'll leave and you'll never want to go to a concert ever again in Indianapolis or Detroit or Phoenix because they just can't replicate it. It is mind-blowing to see the band. I saw them on the floor, and then I saw them in a suite the 2 times I saw them. I love being on the floor in the GA. It was so intimate. But you look up, they got scenes, you're inside the Vatican, and you're inside the Vatican. You're not looking outside of it like you're in it, and you're totally immersed in a globe while the concert is going on. It is mind-blowing. You're going to have the best concert experience of your life, I guarantee it.
I could see Barry Manilow in Bangladesh, and it would make me not want to see a concert in Detroit. You know what I mean?
True on that. And here's the other problem with the Sphere. Only the greatest bands in the world can play there because it's so tight and it's so dialed in acoustically. You can't put Vince Neil in there, if you know what I mean. Like you can't put Axl in there anymore with his voice. You can only have the level of Bono, Adele, the conceptual of Fish or Billy Joel. You got to be at the prime of your life as a vocalist to perform there, or you'll just get laughed out of the building. You're going to have a blast, and hopefully we'll catch up when you're out here.
Well, I'm sold, man. I'm glad that I made the decision and pulled the trigger to do it for Christmas, so we look forward to it. JT, I appreciate it. We'll talk soon, and Colts and Raiders going to be a big one this weekend. Appreciate the perspective.
Take care. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
Again, JT the Brick, of course, Raider Nation Radio out in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Sports Network. The conversation brought to you by AAA. And, of course, their legendary roadside service, flat tire, dead battery. If you run out of gas, you like your keys in your car, whatever it might be, AAA always has your back 24/7, 365. Right now, 1-year AAA Classic membership has 50% off. And I'm telling you, it pays for itself over the course of the year. Don't miss out on the exclusive offer. Visit AAA.com/gift or call 844-GO-AAA-GO or swing by your local AAA office today. So based on that, Jimmy, I'm glad I bought the tickets to the Sphere, right?
Yes. I'm jealous. Now. I'm very jealous. I want full descriptions. I know you'll give them to us, full descriptions when you come back.
Maybe I'll shoot video. Actually, people I think posted video, right?
Yeah.
You know what? Here's the one thing I heard about the Sphere. So for those that don't know, I think people have seen the outside of it. I mean, it's literally a sphere. It's a round, but the interior of it, the entire ceiling and walls and everything is a multi-billion-dollar high-def screen, right? So the whole time that they're performing, it's not even what's on the stage. It's all of the imagery going on around you. It's like you're in the middle of it. I'm just going by what people have told me.
Sure.
There are 4 levels, 100 level, 200 level, 300 level, 400 level, right? And depending on where you're seated, if you're in the 100, 200, or 300 level, you have to be in the front 10 rows, or else when you look up, you are seeing the underside of the balcony above you. So when you buy tickets for it, it's actually, I think, 7 rows. So in other words, the front 7 rows of each section are unobstructed in terms of the ceiling, or you just buy the 400 level, which is the closest to the ceiling, but you now have no interruption around you. So I couldn't find anything in the front 7. I mean, I could, but they were literally like the $9,000 seats. Right. So I'm literally seated 15 rows from the very top of the venue. but it was one of the few that has an unobstructed
Sure.
view. So I don't know. Maybe I'll get motion sickness. Just puke the whole way home. Who knows? But looking forward to it.
I won't wish that upon you. I don't think any will either. Hope you don't get
end of
motion
February.
sickness.
Speaking, by the way, of being under the weather, JMV was, but he's back, and he will be on the air coming up here, top of the hour, and he is, again, at Taylor's. Is that right?
Taylor's Pub in Nora.
Taylor's Pub in Nora. So you still have time if you are out and about to get over and have a cold one and see John. We'll come back, put a tie on all of it here on this Thursday edition of Aquarian Company.
Bud Light Blue Fridays at Ale Emporium in Castleton.
This is how I win.
Today's plays of the day. It's finally here. The Pop-Tarts Bowl has arrived. We'll take North Carolina State plus 124 on the money line against Kansas State. Later as well, the Alamo Bowl will take place. We'll take Arizona over Oklahoma. Thursday Night Football tonight, under 14.5 total points for the New York Jets. They are in Cleveland against the Browns. NBA tonight, it's just a Pacers bet. We'll go Pacers money line at plus 105. Tyrese Halliburton over 25.5 total points. Getty, you got anything? Got any bets?
I do. I hate you for that, by the way. I'm going Ja Morant over 26.5 points. Memphis Grizzlies, he's done that in 3 of the 4 games. Ironically, the only game he hasn't was against the Indiana Pacers, and no rim protection, really. For the Denver Nuggets, it's not the forte of Nikola Jokic, and I will also take the Grizzlies plus 7.5 in that game. Jake?
You think it'd be a total ripoff if the Pop-Tarts Commission just poured like a thing of Pop-Tarts on the winning coach?
Well, you know that the Pop-Tart trophy is edible, right?
I didn't know that,
Yes.
actually.
So the real wager is what form of Pop-Tart is it?
Okay, but like flavor.
Correct.
My question would be, do they do like a questionnaire to each coach before the game and they get to pick and then they
Like they do the milk?
Correct,
Yeah.
yes.
I don't know.
It's got to be Hot Fudge Sundae. That's the best one.
Cookies and cream.
But what's the signature Pop-Tart? It's one of 3.
Strawberry?
It's strawberry, cherry, or blueberry is the signature Pop-Tart, right? Like the original Pop-Tart.
Yeah.
I would bet you it's cherry.
Hot Fudge Sundae is great, though.
S'more. I don't like the s'mores, though. S'mores.
I
aren't
like
so
brown
good.
cinnamon sugar, but I feel like some people don't.
That's a good one.
But I like brown
That's a good
cinnamon.
one. How about this? You asked if I have any wager. I'll simply give you guys a trivia question. My wager is that you're not going to know this because it's pretty obscure, actually.
All right, well, I feel confident
You
on
said
this.
the Jets and Browns are playing, right?
Indeed.
Significance of that matchup, historically speaking.
Oh.
Only because that game is when? Tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
Joe Flacco used to play for the Jets last year, and then they decided not to bring him back.
If you were going with quarterbacks that are vagabond journeymen that have played for both franchises, there's probably a long list there, right? Vinny Testaverde would be one.
Yep.
But that while that is true, Eddie, that's not the answer I'm looking for. Historically speaking, matchup between the Jets and the Browns has significance in the NFL for what reason? It's just very obscure, so I'm not.
It doesn't have, like, the only guess I would have, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, so this is just me throwing a dart at a wall. It has nothing to do with Lennon, correct? Like, that's not.
No, that was
matchup,
the
right?
Dolphins and Patriots.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know.
But you are on the right track. Not in a bad way, but you're on the right track. Not a tragedy.
Okay. What is it?
The Cleveland Browns and the New York Jets was the very first broadcast in Monday Night Football history.
Okay. I might have gotten there eventually.
Which I
That
think
is obscure.
this year, one of the years they played like at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, there's really no throwback uniforms for the Browns, right? I mean, it's kind of the same old deal.
Yeah.
JMV, by the way, is up next. He is at, as we mentioned, Taylor's, which is a great place, up at 86th and basically 86th and Westfield in the little strip mall there in the Nora area. So your chance to go up, have a cold one, and then tomorrow we will get you set for Colts Raiders. We will recap the Pacers tonight and the Chicago Bulls. That game is an 8 o'clock tip in Chicago. Pre-game, Eddie, begins at what time?
7:30 tonight with Pat Boylan on the Kroger pregame show.
And Tyrese Halliburton is questionable for that game tonight. And who did I just see was ruled out for that game tonight?
Probably Bruce Brown.
Bruce Brown is indeed correct, ruled out of that game. So we'll see how that impacts. But as we talked about with Chris Denari earlier, some of the bigger names for the Bulls are out. But Chicago's kind of put things together. So, they're playing well. We'll see what that means for the Pacers, who then come back. It's the New York Knickerbockers on Saturday before the Milwaukee Bucks come back to town. We will come back tomorrow at noon and recap all of it. So John's up next and feeling better, which is a great thing. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
The Ride with JMV.
We know all